The girl was about to be executed by her brother, but the sister who had been bullied by him came to see him off despite opposition. The sister's kindness filled the girl with guilt. However, just as he was about to say the first apology of his life, "Sister," she suddenly showed an expression she had never had before. She smiled coldly and whispered in the girl's ear, "Sister, you're so stupid, framing me for pushing you down the stairs, even making bets. All these things you did to me, were they instigated by the maids? Actually, they're all my people. Everything was orchestrated by me, just to make everyone think you deserved to die. From the moment you and your mother stepped into my house, I wanted to kill you both. Your mother's death was caused by the poison I gave her, although I don't know what you're thinking now. Seeing your painful expression makes me so happy. Goodbye, my foolish sister Arya. I'll miss you." Arya was too shocked to say a word. She never imagined that the sister she had always oppressed was actually the true mastermind. But the executioner's blade wouldn't hesitate for even a moment because of this. With a flash of cold light, her life came to an end. In her final moments, she silently prayed to heaven to let her go back to the past, to reverse time like an hourglass. She wanted to expose her sister's schemes and save her mother. Wow! The sound of a breaking wine glass rang in Arya's ears. She suddenly came to her senses and found herself at home, with all her family members sitting around the table. Her mother, who should have been dead, was scolding her for carelessly breaking the glass, while her innocent-looking sister was worried if she was hurt. Her dying wish had come true. Arya had actually returned to the past. Looking at her seemingly harmless sister, she secretly vowed to settle the score with her sister once and for all in this life. Since she had meticulously crafted herself as a sinner, this time she would be a truly evil woman as she wished. The protagonist, who was murdered by her scheming sister, got a chance at rebirth. In this life, she would tear off her sister's saintly mask, taking advantage of her father coming home for dinner that day. The protagonist recited a poem at the dinner table, which was her first step in declaring war on her sister. Seeing his usually unruly eldest daughter finally willing to study, her father was both surprised and delighted. Although winning his favor was part of the plan, the protagonist was more eager to see her sister's reaction. Seeing her disfavored sister being praised, her sister indeed couldn't bear it. She applauded. Big sister recited so well, but then she seemingly casually added that she could recite it at the age of 4. The protagonist eagerly anticipated her next performance, and her sister indeed fell into the trap step by step. She said there was a matching poem to this one, which her sister who didn't read much probably didn't know, but she could recite it. However, after she finished reciting, the dining room fell into silence. It turned out to be a poem cursing the family. In her previous life, the protagonist was severely scolded by her brother for casually reading a few lines, but this time, although her brother's face turned ashen, he remained silent, and her father only said that the little sister was too young to understand, without pursuing the matter further. Indeed, at this moment, they still favored the sister who maintained the image of a good girl. However, the protagonist was already very satisfied. This was just the beginning. It would be more interesting to destroy her sister little by little. During the meal, the protagonist demonstrated the table manners she had recently learned. As graceful as a lady, her father praised her again upon seeing this. At this time, her sister started to speak sarcastically again. She smiled and said, "So big sister made a mess of her food before because she didn't understand etiquette. I always thought your food was already messy when it was served." The protagonist, instead of getting angry, looked wistful. "So, are you saying that the servants deliberately didn't plate the food nicely because my mother and I were outsiders? How could that be? It was truly my personal problem before, but I never thought that you, who is called a saint, would think so badly of others." This sharp retort hidden in soft words left her sister speechless. She trembled with anger but had to apologize to maintain her image, saying it was just a slip of the tongue. Arya was recounting last night's events to her teacher when she suddenly changed the subject, begging the teacher to teach her embroidery, intending to complete the first step of her revenge plan. After embroidering a lily, she then begged Sarah to teach her how to embroider a rose, aiming to steal Meal's fiancé. Sarah sensed something was off and probed her indirectly. Arya played dumb, which completely put Sarah's mind at ease. How tragic is this woman? Her own mother was poisoned by her so-called sister, and she herself was framed by her sister, about to be executed. She wasn't willing to die like this. Perhaps her sincere prayers were answered by the gods, and she really returned to the past. Thinking back now, her sister Arya had achieved nothing, while her younger sister Meal always curried favor with their father. causing people to often compare the two. The insecure Arya had subconsciously accepted the fact that her sister was better than her. At the dinner table, her father was worrying about a business project, and her sister Meal suggested developing the leather industry. As many noble ladies like to use leather as a fashion statement, her father thought it was feasible, but Arya didn't think so. Having experienced future events, she understood that leather never became popular due to its complex maintenance and strong odor. The maid beside them, seeing Arya wanting to speak, couldn't help but whisper. As in their perception, Arya was a naive girl who knew nothing, but her words shocked everyone present. Arya not only compared the pros and cons of fur and leather but also spoke about the prospects of fur development. After careful consideration, her father thought Arya's words made a lot of sense, but then wondered how a teenage girl could know all this, so he asked Arya where she got this information. For a businessman, the source of information is the most valuable. The clever Arya said she had forgotten. Her father immediately sent someone to verify the information, while Meal reluctantly handed her father a hairpin she had picked up, realizing her sister had stolen the spotlight again. A few days later, her father decided to invest in fur, as the accuracy of the information had been confirmed. Just as he was about to leave, Arya gave her embroidery to her father. Looking at the delicate patterns, everyone couldn't help but marvel at it. A perfect example of killing with kindness. Aaliyah turned to ask Meal, "Lovely sister, do you need me to make you a handkerchief?" Meal was deeply hurt, her face looking extremely unpleasant. She began learning embroidery like her sister, but the teacher she hired wasn't as skilled as Aaliyah. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's mother chatted with her, mentioning Meal's love interest, saying that if Oscar were brought home, they would enjoy all the glory and wealth. Gradually, the thoughts of mother and daughter connected. Aaliyah would surely destroy Meal with her own hands. The brother went to school. The sister was busy with embroidery all day. The family tutor Sarah came to invite Aaliyah to a tea party, and to show off her lovely student. Aaliyah thought for a moment, and then agreed. Aaliyah, returning to the past, would surely destroy everything of her sister Meal with her own hands. To attend the tea party, she would definitely need a proper dress, but Aaliyah's wardrobe was a bit childish, so she had a bright idea and thought of Meal. Aaliyah quickly had Jessie put the clothes back, then set the wardrobe on fire. The spread of the fire attracted the servants. Aaliyah hurriedly pretended to look pitiful. This act was very effective, packaging herself as the weaker party. Seeing the clothes burned to ashes, her mother told her to borrow one from Meal. Although Meal was extremely unwilling, she still did it to stop the rumors. Unexpectedly, Aaliyah came prepared. Finding last year's birthday gift from Oscar in the wardrobe, Meal felt panicked. How did her sister know about the existence of this dress? If she didn't lend it, people would call her stingy. To create her image as a saint, Meal gritted her teeth and agreed. The maid Jessie said the previous hourglass had been repaired. Aaliyah took a carriage to town. She was going to retrieve the repaired hourglass. This street was where Aaliyah had died before. Thinking of this, her heart tightened. The carriage stopped in front of the clothing store. Looking at the luxurious interior of the store, she bought up all the clothes she liked, then left triumphantly. At the entrance, Aaliyah saw two children selling newspapers, which reminded her of her miserable childhood. There was a boy named Hans who was close to her, but was killed by a carriage while selling newspapers. The driver fled the scene. She immediately ordered Jessie to buy all his newspapers, and pay an extra month's wages, and to buy all new newspapers if they came out. Aaliyah looked at the bought newspapers. A headline caught her attention. It was about the Crown Prince exposing slavery. She thought if she could win over such a person, her revenge would surely be within reach. But the current Aaliyah seemed to have no such channels. She finally arrived at the repair shop. Seeing the hourglass intact, Aaliyah was overjoyed and immediately paid double the price. Just then, a hooded person approached her. Though she had done nothing, Aaliyah shivered all over. She felt an inexplicable fear. Then, she saw the casino entry tickets on the owner's desk, perhaps to thank him for repairing the hourglass. Aaliyah actually told the owner to sell the entry tickets, because soon, the Crown Prince would shut down the casino. By then, the high-priced entry tickets would be worthless. Hearing this, the owner was confused, but the hooded person turned back. He quickly dealt with the guards, grabbed Aaliyah's hand, and asked her what she meant by those words. Under the black hood, a handsome face was clearly visible. Aaliyah stared at him in a daze. The familiar eyes made her imagine I seem to have seen this man somewhere before. Seeing her silent, the man prepared to use force. The woman returned to the past with resentment before her death. Now she was on the path of revenge. The man before her made her imagine, I seem to have seen her somewhere before. Seeing her silent, the man prepared to use force. Aaliyah made up a story saying that Viscount Lupul was suffering heavy losses and planned to sell the casino and run away. As it was just a rumor, the man couldn't verify the truth of the matter, so he had to let Aaliyah go. Watching her disappearing figure, the man's follower mistook Aaliyah for Meal. Is it Meal? The man muttered. The name means bee, but it doesn't suit this young lady at all. She seems so familiar. Have I seen her somewhere before? The follower beside him offered to investigate further, but the man refused. After all, they had a plan to execute. When he recalled everything about Aaliyah again, a lingering warmth remained on his hand for a long time. Meanwhile, Aaliyah returned home. She was furious about the incompetence of her two followers. She then started to mock them sarcastically. However, this was a good opportunity to win people over, so she deliberately had the two serve her tea. Unexpectedly, it was very effective, and she quickly gained two loyal servants. But Aaliyah was still shaken. Thinking of that chilling handsome man, she muttered that it would be better not to see him again. On the other side, the handsome man began to gather his people and started to act. They decided to take over the casino tonight. Sarah came to visit and told Alia about the tea party. Noble girls often exchange handmade gifts at these parties, and Alia happened to be excellent at embroidery, so she could make some handkerchiefs to foster relationships. This gift-giving custom also exists among family members. However, Meal and Alia's relationship was quite special. They were more like two rivals, neither submitting to the other. Under Sarah's guidance, Alia made a handkerchief with an imperial pattern, and the first thing she did was use it to mock Meal. When Alia gave her the handkerchief, Meal's entire face turned ugly. Faced with a sister several times stronger than herself, she felt ashamed and could only hurriedly leave with a random excuse. Everything prepared, Alia went to attend the tea party, intending to be cautious and not let tragedy repeat itself. However, the two guards from yesterday were clearly frightened, but seeing Alia's smiling face, they let down their guard. Along the way, Alia had an uneasy feeling, as if something big was about to happen. A woman returned to the past with resentment before her death. Alia made her entrance amidst everyone's gaze, and seeing her plain attire, the noble ladies began to whisper. It seemed Alia wasn't as ill-mannered as rumored. Her graceful demeanor was likable, and her tragic experience evoked sympathy. Soon, Alia established an image of a pitiful person, and even portrayed Meal as an unforgivable character. Afterwards, she took out handmade handkerchiefs to give to everyone, charming all the noble ladies, who in turn offered to take her out for entertainment. Suddenly, someone voiced an objection. Recently, Viscount Lupul has been involved in gambling and human trafficking. It's not safe outside. Did the usually cautious crown prince let him slip away? Alia was startled upon hearing this. Could it be that her actions had affected the crown prince's plans? Although it had nothing to do with her revenge, she couldn't ignore it. After leaving the tea party, she hurriedly sent her subordinate John to investigate. However, John's friend didn't disclose the crown prince's whereabouts. If he returned empty-handed, he would surely face Lady Alia's scolding. With no other options, John entered a repair shop to inquire. After exchanging pleasantries with the owner, he suddenly fainted. It turned out the owner had put a sedative in the water. In the darkness, that handsome man appeared, with John's friend standing beside him. Could the handsome man be the crown prince? They mistakenly thought John was connected to Viscount Lupul, so they sent people to investigate secretly. Suddenly, there was a sound from outside, and they quickly sprang into action. The next day, John returned unsuccessful. As expected, Alia's face darkened with anger. Just yesterday, Viscount Lupul was arrested at an inn near the casino. He had been lurking around the casino for so long, yet achieved nothing. What a useless thing, Alia thought to herself. Since everything had returned to normal, she resumed her own plans. Alia petitioned her mother, hoping to learn other knowledge and hire different tutors. She clearly knew that in the future, countless people would try to curry favor, but upon hearing she had been abandoned by her family, they would all leave without exception. This was the perfect time to expand her network, so the tutors came one after another, though their fawning manner put pressure on Alia. But this was good too. It greatly helped her studies, and her ultimate goal was to take Oscar away. Thinking of Meal's agonized expression, Alia couldn't help but laugh. Seeing her happy demeanor, Sarah quickly asked what had happened. Alia told her everything that had occurred recently. Although she had more than one tutor, Sarah was still her favorite. She was overjoyed after hearing this, unaware that a great plan was quietly forming in Alia's mind. This woman, framed by her sister, returned to the past due to resentment before her death, thanks to the hourglass of time, and thus began her path of frenzied revenge. Her sister Meal frowned, seemingly still unable to match her sister in embroidery. Just as Alia was feeling happy, a commotion came from outside. She quickly sent Jessie to check, while she lay down on the bed and fell asleep. When she woke up feeling extremely hungry, she pushed open the door and walked towards the stairs, finding it unusually quiet outside. Before Jessie returned, she saw the identity of the visitor in the living room. It was Oscar, the man her sister had feelings for. Alia understood the moment for revenge had come, so she went upstairs to change. Meal, realizing her sister had seen Oscar, immediately became flustered and hurriedly invited her to dine. Alia, however, took her time getting ready, making a dazzling entrance to Oscar's surprise. For such an unexpected guest, her sister felt an unprecedented sense of crisis. Alia's beauty even made her brother Kane blush, and his heart race. Soon, Oscar started chatting with her, leaving Meal on the sidelines. Seeing her sister steal the spotlight, Meal quickly jumped into the conversation, praising the clothes Oscar had given her. Kane hurriedly tried to assist, intending to have Oscar and Meal go shopping together, but unexpectedly backfired. As Oscar suggested they go buy clothes together instead, the siblings panicked, with Meal quickly saying, "How could we leave our guest alone?" But Oscar naively said, "Isn't Miss Alia here?" Looking at her sister beside her, Meal trembled with anger. Seeing the opportunity, Alia immediately called for a carriage to be arranged, sending the two siblings away, while she helped Oscar settle into rest. After returning to her room, Arya excitedly started dancing. Jessie, standing nearby, was at a loss for words and quickly asked her what to do with the handkerchief she was holding. Arya understood. Her sister might also give Oscar a handkerchief, so she decided to carry it with her just in case. Watching the siblings leave, Arya secretly rejoiced. She opened her book to preview the next lesson, but was disgusted by the history of the nobility, so she went to the garden to clear her mind. Just as she was about to water the flowers on the door, Oscar pushed the door open, and the water poured directly onto his head. Arya quickly apologized, but to her surprise, Oscar didn't mind, and even stepped forward to grab both her hands. At this moment, Arya was overwhelmed with anxiety. She couldn't make any mistakes, or it would ruin her revenge plan. Lost in thought, she suddenly started crying, and Oscar immediately came forward to comfort her. This action also revealed his character. He was a soft-hearted man who couldn't bear to see a woman cry. So Arya took advantage of this, seizing the opportunity to hand him the handkerchief she was carrying. The noble Oscar was a soft-hearted man, and Arya, the female protagonist, used this to her advantage, smoothly handing him the handkerchief she was carrying. Oscar took it and started using it, but when he saw the pattern on the handkerchief, he was somewhat surprised. "Isn't this my family's crest?" Arya quickly explained. "It's because the Frederick family crest is very beautiful, and you happen to be the first guest I've received, so it all seems like a destined coincidence." Oscar pondered for a moment, then took the handkerchief with him. Arya smiled happily and quickly instructed Jessie to prepare bath water. After saying goodbye, Oscar felt a different emotion in his heart, seemingly quite fond of this beautiful young lady. Soon it was dinner time, and Kane and Meal returned from their outing. They had prepared gifts for Oscar, which turned out to be 3 pen nibs. Oscar sighed, clearly uninterested in such gifts, but still politely thanked them. Arya observed the actions of the three, initially wanting to stir things up with the handkerchief incident, but she held back, instead putting on a pitiful appearance. Oscar immediately noticed and quickly asked about her condition with concern. Seeing this, Meal's face turned green with anger, and she dropped her fork on the ground. The next day, Oscar and Kane returned to the academy. Hearing the news, Arya's mother rushed back from the neighboring country, but Oscar had already left, and she seemed somewhat disappointed. Fortunately, Arya had seized the opportunity and firmly grasped Oscar's heart. Not long after, they received his reply. Amidst everyone's discussion, the butler announced, "There's also a gift for Miss Arya." Meal was stunned by everything that had happened. Arya quickly dealt a verbal blow, Perhaps it's because he accepted my handkerchief. Meal was extremely embarrassed, hoping to save face through the letter, but Arya smoothly deflected, refusing to read the contents of the letter, so she instructed Meal's maid, Emma, to open her own gift, and everyone saw it was a set of clothes. But Arya seemed unimpressed, only taking the hairpin inside before hurriedly leaving. She quickly arrived at the tea party venue, where she presented the embroidery she had made for the noble ladies, earning praise from everyone. After feigned pleasantries, the tea party came to an end. Just as Arya was about to leave in her carriage, she suddenly noticed an unfamiliar coachman, so she quickly sent someone to investigate his identity. It turned out to be the old coachman from the mansion, who was about to retire. Arya angrily questioned, "Why wasn't I informed in advance?" If I had just gotten into the carriage, Arya swallowed the rest of her words, knowing that if she had gotten in the carriage, she would probably be dead by now. It seemed that Meal had deliberately placed foolish people around her. Such cunning at such a young age, truly befitting the evil Meal. This woman, betrayed by her sister, returned to the past due to her resentment before death, and thus a feast of revenge began. Arya looked at the coachman before her with suspicion. Having experienced being poisoned by her sister Meal, she had to tread carefully. She let the coachman return alone. Listening to the strange noises from the carriage, she deduced there must be explosives inside. It was obvious that Meal was behind this. She quickly sent an attendant to find a new carriage, and the attendant left grumbling. Arya came from a lowly background, surrounded by incompetent people, so it was natural that she couldn't receive proper protection. She then entered an accessory shop with Jesse. Seeing Arya's elegant and graceful manner, the shopkeeper knew she was someone important, and quickly brought out the shop's finest items. Arya weighed 2 brooches, unable to make a decision, as this was a gift for Oscar. As long as he thought the gift was valuable, the higher the price, the better. Finally, she chose the emerald brooch. Arya also asked the shopkeeper to custom make several small brooches, quickly sketching the design on paper. The shopkeeper was somewhat surprised, because what she drew was clearly the crest of the Lauschte family. But the Arya before him was different from the rumors, showing good taste and grace. To keep this customer, the shopkeeper gave Arya a blue sapphire necklace. She was delighted with the sensible shopkeeper and told him she would definitely come back often. However, the carriage hadn't arrived yet, so Arya decided to have tea while waiting. The remaining attendant seemed idle, so Arya sent him to find a carriage. Her emotions were still unsettled. After all, the previous incident had caused considerable harm. Arya opened the window for some air. Looking at the poor people coming and going on the street, she couldn't help but reflect. Having finally entered the life of nobility, she must stand firm and not be pushed into the abyss by Meal. She must make the Lauschte family pay the price. Just then, a familiar figure caught her eye. Arya looked closely, and it was the rude country noble from before. At that moment, the man's blue pupils met hers, and he immediately gave a mischievous smile. Aaliyah's face instantly turned red, her heart racing. She hurriedly closed the curtains, flustered beyond control, because she still couldn't figure out what this man was up to. He was clearly a cold person, so why did he smile at her? A sense of unease instantly swept over her entire body, and she lost interest in the tea and snacks Jesse brought. Now she just wanted to leave this troublesome place as soon as possible. Aaliyah forced herself not to think about this man. After all, her purpose was revenge, and she couldn't afford to have distracting thoughts. Just as Aaliyah was boarding the carriage, a bouquet of flowers was knocked to the ground. To her surprise, that man picked it up. The destined pair met again. This young woman was framed by her sister, her life hanging by a thread. A magical hourglass allowed her to travel back to the past, and her revenge plan began. However, the situation before her left her puzzled. Since changing the timeline, unexpected events kept occurring. The man held the flowers, offering Aaliyah sincere thanks, saying it was thanks to her guidance that he was able to keep his precious treasure. Aaliyah felt some disdain, realizing he was a fallen nobleman, but accompanied by an aggressiveness that was hard to ignore, and his attitude change was too intense. Aaliyah displayed a cold expression, but couldn't refuse in public. The man immediately knelt on one knee, presenting the flowers to her. Aaliyah wanted to inquire about the man's background, but only got a name, Yas. Then she waved her hand, having her attendant smell the flowers, and finding nothing unusual, she finally relaxed. As Aaliyah was about to leave, Yas suggested a kiss on the hand as a farewell and to apologize for earlier. Aaliyah refused without a second thought, deliberately dropping the flowers on the ground and stepping on them as she got into the carriage. Looking at the broken flowers, Aaliyah pretended to be heartbroken. Yas was somewhat surprised, then burst into laughter, hoping to see Yas's embarrassed expression. But seeing this reaction instead, Aaliyah was a bit disappointed, but it also made her suspicious, becoming increasingly curious about Yas's identity. In the evening, Aaliyah returned to the mansion by carriage. Unexpectedly, the previous coachman had food poisoning. She knew this was no accident. It must have been deliberately done by Meal's people. John continued, there were also problems with the carriage parts earlier. If ridden, it would certainly have caused an accident. Aaliyah casually praised him and sent him away with a reward. It seems taking Oscar away was the right choice. Only this would drive Meal into madness, guiding her down the path of villainy, exposing her true nature. However, Meal now has too many accomplices. The mansion is full of people loyal to her. Aaliyah plans to use her mother's hand to eliminate the problem, so she told her everything about what just happened. After hearing this, her mother flew into a rage, gathering everyone to severely punish the coachman. In the chaos, the coachman was at a loss for words. Aaliyah quickly fanned the flames on the side, pointing the blame towards the butler. As all the servants follow his orders, the butler immediately humbly admitted his mistake, saying it was his negligence. The manager among the servants had a unique authority. Aaliyah realized she couldn't get rid of the butler, but should instead win him over, so she found an excuse to exonerate him, suggesting someone deliberately bypassed the butler. Aaliyah looked towards Meal, who was now terrified, never imagining her scheme would fail. Aaliyah pressed her advantage, intending to call the guard. Meal, fearing this would implicate her, claimed that even if Aaliyah had an accident, it wouldn't be fatal. Aaliyah seized on the flaw in her words. How do you know what kind of accident would happen? Could it be that everything is related to you? This woman returned to the past through killing. She wants to make her sister who framed her pay a terrible price. Now what needs to be done is to force her sister Meal to admit her crimes. Meal began to stammer. The maid Emma beside her quickly whispered advice in Meal's ear. After listening, Meal had a sudden inspiration, cleverly using rhetoric to turn crisis into opportunity. Aaliyah began to feel sad. If something really happened, I wouldn't be standing here. Then she suddenly changed her tone. If my sister had gotten into that carriage, even if nothing happened, I would still be worried sick. Then she hugged her mother, putting on a pitiful act. Meal was relieved. After a series of interactions, she knew her sister had completely changed, no longer the naive girl she used to be. Aaliyah clearly knew that if she didn't abandon this loyal subordinate now, Meal's image would collapse in everyone's eyes, and no one would believe her anymore. With no choice, Meal could only. The matter ended in the midst of the commotion. At mealtime, Aaliyah sat alone at the table, while Meal stayed in her room refusing to come out, pretending to be unwell. This was Aaliyah's happiest mealtime. Enjoying the butler coming to report, the jeweler's people have delivered the gift to the door. Her attitude towards Aaliyah had already changed, gradually starting to get closer to her. Mother was about to announce the result. Aaliyah hurried to inspect the goods, looking at the exquisite brooch. It far exceeded her expectations. Then Mother gathered the servants to announce the verdict. So the coachman who left without permission was demoted, and the one who rashly replaced him was dismissed. Meal felt dizzy, hurriedly pretending to be unwell, causing everyone to show concern. Thinking she could leave like this, unexpectedly Aaliyah called her to stop, then instructed Jessie to bring that blue sapphire necklace, giving it to Meal amidst everyone's exclamations. The maid Annie watching was secretly surprised, not expecting Miss Aaliyah to be so generous. Seeing Meal's awkward expression, Aaliyah personally put the necklace on her sister. Annie was extremely envious. Mother, seeing this harmonious facade, gave a few words of advice before turning to leave. Aaliyah was enjoying afternoon tea in her room. How she wished the coachman who had lost his backing could chop off Meal's dog head. Then she thought of the maid standing beside Meal. Emma was always giving her ideas. If so, her death at that time couldn't be unrelated to her, so she planned to use Annie to investigate Emma. But now there was something more important, which was to write a letter to Oscar. He immediately asked Jessie to send out the letter paper and gifts, while he casually flipped the hourglass. Suddenly Jessie appeared before his eyes, repeating the previous conversation. Aaliyah looked at him with a surprised expression. What is it like to have a time hourglass? Casually flipping the hourglass, the maid who had just gone out to deliver the letter appeared before him again. Aaliyah was very surprised at Jessie in front of her, because this conversation had just happened a few minutes ago, and the pen she put down and the letter she sent out were back in her hand intact. Aaliyah felt she was hallucinating, because in her impression, Jessie had already taken the letter away. When she looked back at her desk, she found that the number of letter papers was the same as when they were brought, which meant she hadn't started writing the letter yet. Aaliyah felt strange, but before she could think much about it, she fell into a drowsy sleep. The next noon, Jessie brought her juice. Aaliyah didn't expect to sleep for so long, so she glanced at the hourglass and casually flipped it over again. Something magical happened. Jessie suddenly appeared behind him, and the finished juice was full and placed aside. A flash of inspiration struck Aaliyah's mind, and a crazy idea emerged. Perhaps she had returned to the past. She recalled her previous subtle actions. Aaliyah instantly understood that it was the hourglass in front of her that had taken her back to a few minutes ago, so she smiled coquettishly. After constant attempts, she finally mastered the method of activating the hourglass, but she could only flip it once a day, and could only go back 5 minutes. But this was enough for her to play with. For example, venting her dissatisfaction with the tutor, then mocking his son once, then flipping the hourglass to turn back time, offering false praise to the tutor. However, the side effect was that it would cause great strain on the body. But Aaliyah disregarded all this. After all, revenge was the top priority, so she began her journey of courting death, teasing Meal, pouring water on his head, and deliberately tripping him. Meal's cries for help echoed throughout the mansion. Anyway, it could be remedied with the hourglass later, but it added some fun to her boring life. However, Oscar didn't respond to him. 2 whole weeks passed without any news. Aaliyah thought of what the attendant had said at the time. Although Oscar had accepted the gift, he showed no indication under his intelligence. Perhaps it was because of the upcoming final exams. Considering the attendant's hard work, Aaliyah casually offered a few words of comfort. After all, accepting the gift was the most important thing. Although the content of the letter might cause him to refuse, accumulating affinity was also a good plan. Aaliyah was a bit anxious, even considering using the hourglass to take it back at one point. While she was hesitating, Oscar replied. Aaliyah read the letter carefully. It was clearly drawing a line, not wanting to have too much entanglement with her. How could that be? Aaliyah called Jessie and quickly wrote a reply. Seeing her happy expression, Jessie had a bad premonition. If you have a time hourglass, wouldn't you go further and further down the path of self-indulgence? The dessert eaten a second ago could be restored to its original state just by flipping the hourglass. Aaliyah distributed them to the servants, so she could not only eat her fill, but also win the hearts of the servants. Jessie was extremely touched. Then, she took out the books Aaliyah had asked her to buy. Basic Economics. This was an economics book convenient for children to read. Aaliyah planned to study various aspects of knowledge to become erudite. After all, under the old aristocratic social system, women were not allowed to attend classes at academies. Aaliyah could only rely on self-study, and it could be useful in the future. If she wanted to make her Earl father listen to her words, it was very necessary to have certain knowledge. Aaliyah pondered her prospects, planning to create a career with this, studying hard for her own wealth. Jessie suddenly popped up. She was confused about Aaliyah's requirements for this year's birthday party. After all, in previous years, the scale of Aaliyah's parties was unprecedented, but this time she didn't invite anyone, only requesting to have tea with a few familiar noble ladies. Aaliyah knew well that Meal's birthday was also approaching. If there was a stark contrast with her, she would definitely be pointed at and gossiped about. Being low-key at this moment was the right way. Teacher Sarah came to visit. Aaliyah happily went forward to greet her. The maids smiled at the warm scene. She clearly understood that Sarah would become her strong support, and her visit this time was to inquire about Aaliyah's preferences for birthday gifts. But Aaliyah particularly wanted a handkerchief. Sarah got excited when she heard this, and brought out many ideas. But the handkerchief she wanted was one made by Sarah herself, and she wanted one for each of them, like sisters. Teacher Sarah was extremely touched. She stepped forward and grasped Aaliyah's hands, expressing that she would definitely put her heart into weaving it. Aaliyah was a bit speechless, because she knew what would happen next. Sarah would meet the Marquis in social circles, and then they would fall in love, with no time to care about friends. But Sarah was not interested in social circles, and her expression gradually dimmed. Seeing this, Arya changed the subject, asking Sarah what she wanted to do first after becoming an adult. Sarah's response was unexpected. She said that because Arya chose to be a teacher, growing up alongside children was the luckiest thing in Sarah's life. Arya was a bit surprised, not expecting Sarah to genuinely like her. This development was simply wonderful. When Sarah becomes a Marchioness, Arya will stand by her side, and at that time, she will surely shine brightly, impossible to ignore. Today is Arya's birthday, and the noble young ladies are presenting their gifts. But Arya can't seem to be happy, because the nobleman Oscar didn't attend, even though he had been invited in the letter. Without time to think more, the ladies urged Arya to open the gifts. Looking at the rough craftsmanship, she still put on a smiling face, while secretly thinking of giving them to Jesse. Sarah also handed over her gift, and when Arya opened it, she saw a handkerchief next to a pair of delicate gloves. Sarah took out a matching pair, happily showing them off to everyone. Arya was stunned, speechless for a while. This handkerchief was Sarah's labor of love, the best gift she had ever received. Everyone praised Arya's clothes profusely. After all, her fur was special and must be very valuable. Arya smiled and said it was bought by her father, the Count, and then began to strike at their hearts, claiming that her favorite gift was the teddy bear her father bought for her. Curious, everyone watched as Arya quickly brought out the teddy bear, which was covered in diamonds. The young ladies showed expressions of horror. Only Sarah naively thought the teddy bear was really cute. Jesse brought in the tea and snacks, and just as the birthday party was about to begin, Meal burst in, asking in front of everyone why she wasn't invited to the birthday party. Arya quickly stood up, using Meal's poor health as an excuse to defend her position. Meal smiled contemptuously, had Emma hand her a bouquet of flowers, and then left with insincere blessings, leaving Arya standing there alone. The sister not inviting her sister to the party would surely be gossiped about. He started to panic. The hourglass was upstairs, wondering if there was still time to run back and get it. Arya suddenly came to her senses, realizing there was no need to make a fuss over such a small matter. So she portrayed Meal as a fragile girl, hinting at her dissatisfaction with the family situation. After all, it was her and her mother who had intruded. Perhaps Meal still couldn't accept the blended family, and then blamed herself, causing Sarah to comfort her involuntarily. Everyone was immediately led astray, showering Arya with concern. Meal had finally found a chance to embarrass her sister, but Arya cleverly deflected it. The party ended happily, and teacher Sarah also returned home by carriage. Arya stayed alone in her room, burning the flowers Meal had given her to ashes. It seems she must carry the hourglass with her at all times, just in case. Just then, Jesse hurriedly pushed open the door. Oscar had arrived. While Arya was changing clothes, Meal seized the opportunity. What would she say to Oscar? Taking advantage of her sister changing clothes, Meal went ahead and started chatting with the nobleman Oscar, noticing he seemed to have lost some weight. So she gradually shifted the topic to Arya. Clearly, Oscar didn't know it was her birthday today. He had only brought a bunch of white flowers as a courtesy. Meal pretended to be pitiful, claiming that Arya hadn't invited her to the party, and that she had only come downstairs to deliver a gift before returning to her room. Then immediately asked Oscar to attend her own birthday party. Seeing how happy Meal looked, even if he was somewhat unwilling, he finally agreed. Arya was eavesdropping at the door but didn't hear the entire conversation. Seeing him coming through the door, Meal quickly stood up and handed the stage over to her sister, then passed by with an intimate smile. Arya felt somewhat regretful to be caught off guard at this moment, and not knowing the content of their conversation, but still, she pretended to be calm and exchanged pleasantries with Oscar. Arya showed off the hair ornament he had given her, captivating Oscar, and then asked in return, why wasn't he wearing the brooch she had given him? Just as Oscar was about to speak, Arya took over, lying that it was her first time preparing a gift for someone, and hoped Oscar wouldn't refuse her goodwill. This man softened again, originally intending to return the brooch, but by a twist of fate, Arya personally pinned it on him, leading to this outcome. Unsure whether to be happy or worried, however, one thing was certain. Oscar's heart had begun to waver. He gave this bouquet of flowers to Arya as a gift, but how could the cunning Arya be satisfied with just that? She begged Oscar to be her pen pal. After all, she was lonely and had no friends. Oscar knew he should refuse. If people found out about this, it would surely cause gossip. But seeing Arya's pitiful look, Oscar could only reluctantly agree. Arya was overjoyed, unable to hide her happiness. Oscar hoped for the best, thinking that writing an occasional letter shouldn't be a problem. After all, Arya was so pitiful, he couldn't just ignore her. This meeting ended happily. Early the next morning, Arya woke up with bleary eyes, thinking about how she had cleverly used the hourglass yesterday. Otherwise she would have been rejected by Oscar. She pondered about having a watch made to indicate the hourglass's effectiveness period. At this moment, Jesse pushed open the door, concernedly inquiring about Arya's health condition. After all, she had previously, intentionally or not, mentioned something related to her life. Looking at the stubborn Jesse, Arya felt like rewarding her loyal servant, so she pinned Jesse against the wall. The servant was actually pinned by Arya. Servant Jesse looked at her somewhat bewildered. After all, Arya used to beat and scold him before. Arya also realized this. She quickly admitted her mistake and pinned a golden brooch on his chest, as an apology and reflection for the past, aiming to let other maids see that Arya was a generous and wealthy person who treated her servants very kindly. Then she sent Jesse to the jewelry store to custom make a pocket watch that could reset in 5 minutes. After receiving the order, Jesse drove away quickly. Watching his receding figure, Arya discovered that a carriage had arrived downstairs. It was teacher Sarah. She hurriedly changed clothes and went down to greet her. According to the upcoming developments, Meal should be sending maids to cause trouble. To counter this move, Arya decided to choose someone easy to win over, so she randomly selected a short-haired maid to serve tea. Just as Arya decided to keep her, she was about to leave, citing Meal as the reason. Arya had a sudden inspiration and asked her about Annie's information. Upon learning that she was the youngest maid, she instructed the short-haired maid to bring the hourglass from the decorative cabinet. Time rewound 5 minutes. After hearing that the short-haired maid was unavailable, Arya directly designated Annie as her temporary maid, so this freckle-faced little maid was summoned over. She watched Arya and Sarah dancing gracefully, couldn't help but be moved, and unconsciously became entranced. Just then, Jesse returned, pushing the door open. Seeing him sweating profusely, Arya quickly handed him a glass of water. Amid Arya's concerned voice, Jesse drank it all at once. Of course, this was just for show. The purpose was to let Annie see this scene. Then he was dismissed. During the intermission, Jesse hurriedly apologized to Arya. After all, he had been quite presumptuous earlier, but the goal had been achieved. Annie was indeed preoccupied with what had just happened. The news quickly reached Meal, who, upon learning that her sister lacked maids, actually offered to give up her own maid to take care of Arya. On the surface, it seemed like sisterly love, but in reality, it was sending someone to secretly keep an eye on Oscar and Arya's every move. Unexpectedly, this move played right into Arya's hands, so she designated Annie as her second maid. Arya's intention was to have her do some odd jobs, and she anticipated that Meal would have her monitor herself, but she didn't expect Annie to be so naive. Staring at her directly, Arya felt a bit awkward and had to find some tasks for her to do. Seeing how deft Annie was, Arya was somewhat surprised. Then she smelled a strong scent on Annie, instantly finding a breakthrough point, so she lifted Annie's face. A noble young lady was actually doing makeup for a maid. She was laying the groundwork for her revenge plan, and Maid Annie was one of her pawns. Looking at her new self in the mirror, Annie was somewhat surprised, not expecting to become so attractive after applying makeup, which caused a slight change in her firm heart. Arya, through the scent emanating from her, was certain that the maid before her had been secretly using Meal's cosmetics, so she went along with it and gave all her makeup products to her. She also gave Annie a ribbon, then stated that as long as she performed well, she could not only get a gold medal like Jesse but also receive better treatment. Annie listened with her eyes wide open. Then Arya changed the subject and started practicing tea parties with Annie. Girls who grow up in noble mansions always think they can become nobles overnight. Although the practice before her made Annie feel embarrassed, she was overjoyed inside. Arya knew well that this little maid was a person full of material desires, and both shrewd and vicious, so she had to provide her with the opportunity to turn from a crow into a phoenix. But the premise was to be used by herself, and Arya was the guide for her to become a noble. It meant letting Annie choose sides, but unexpectedly, she began to hesitate. It seemed that compared to the benefits Arya gave her, Meal's deterrence made her afraid to act rashly, which was expected. After sending her away, Arya lay quietly on the bed, knowing that in the current situation, she couldn't win against Meal no matter what. Now she had to wait for the right time to mature. Another period of time passed. Arya looked at the bustling crowd at the bottom of the building, feeling numb. Today was Meal's birthday. They were all coming to deliver gifts. Cartloads of gifts representing the vanity of the nobility. But Arya had no interest in these things. The only thing she cared about was Oscar, who had become her pen pal, hadn't replied to her letter. Just as Arya was feeling upset, another carriage stopped downstairs. She thought it was Oscar, but it turned out to be her father who had been away for years. He had specially come back to celebrate Meal's birthday. Arya couldn't help but recall the scene of her mother and herself dying tragically. She would surely make such a warm scene become a beautiful dream after her revenge is fulfilled. Arya's target was not only Meal but the entire Lost family. Just as she was about to use the hourglass to play at the birthday party, a person named Rain appeared. Seeing the appearance of this new character, Arya became uneasy. What had she unknowingly facilitated again? This woman has noble blood, and receives all kinds of expensive gifts on every birthday. However, beneath the pure exterior, there was an evil heart embedded. Arya was speechless looking at the gift Rain brought, not knowing who its owner was. Giving such an expensive accessory on their first visit, seeing their intimate gestures, Arya felt devastated. Was Meal's charm really that great? It seems that the variables produced by using the hourglass are inevitable. Today is Meal's birthday. She wore a dress that Oscar gave her. Coincidentally, Arya had received the same style. Perhaps out of politeness, Arya greeted her father, which also caught Lane's attention. He complimented Arya's beauty, then turned back to continue chatting with Meal. Arya felt a bit lost, as this was the first time she had been outshone in terms of looks. However, being broad-minded, she realized this person was just a degenerate from a good count's family. Just as she was about to turn and leave, her father unexpectedly called her back and took out an exquisite jewelry box. It's worth noting that before this, only Meal would receive such gifts. It seemed her efforts had paid off, so now the task at hand was to embarrass Meal. Arya immediately changed into a different outfit and then appeared in her sister's line of sight. Seeing her sister's malicious look, Meal felt somewhat uneasy and quickly discovered the issue. Arya was wearing the same outfit as her. Her face turned extremely unpleasant. The guests immediately began to gossip. Meal, who had just been showing off her clothes, was now extremely embarrassed. However, it was clear that everyone scoffed at the rumored image of Arya as an evil woman, wanting to take the opportunity to criticize her vulgar behavior. But now Arya was impeccable, surpassing them in both appearance and etiquette, which made people doubt the authenticity of the rumors. Just as Arya was feeling smug, Meal was suddenly called over with a delighted expression. It was her brother Cain. What a false alarm! But Oscar appeared beside Cain, which greatly surprised Arya. In her memory, Oscar had never attended Meal's birthday before, so why didn't he even reply to her letter? Had her actions caused things to develop in an unexpected direction? What was going on with Cain? He was staring at her lecherously. Even Oscar's face had turned red. The battle-hardened Arya instantly understood. Both men had developed feelings for her, and Oscar couldn't bear the guilt, so he came to attend Meal's birthday. Arya quickly went forward to invite the two, then pretended to be heartbroken, saying she shouldn't interfere with their relationship, and ran upstairs. This trick worked like a charm. Under Meal's contemptuous gaze, Oscar chased after her upstairs. This man actually abandoned his fiancée and went to the second floor to look for her sister? Would an illicit love affair begin from here? Arya had been waiting for a long time, even changing the tea 3 times. Finally, Oscar arrived. Looking at his flushed face, Arya felt an indescribable pleasure. She understood that with just a little push, she could win Oscar's heart completely. Oscar was also puzzled, clearly having feelings for someone else, yet longing for Arya in front of him. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, the two started chatting. Arya seemed to be confiding in him, saying she didn't have a single friend and greatly dreaded party scenes. Oscar fell right into the trap, even expressing dissatisfaction with Meal, as if saying it was all because of her that he couldn't talk to Arya. But he was just a pen pal. He had planned to go home early, but Arya kept him for dinner. Oscar's inner struggle was clear to see, so she emphasized again that they were just friends. Since it was just a conversation between friends, what could go wrong? Soon it was dinner time. Unexpectedly, Lane was also sitting at the dinner table, which caught Arya's attention. It seemed this attendant wanted to play matchmaker for his master, so she began to analyze his identity. As she was thinking, Oscar's gaze suddenly met hers. Seeing Arya unable to join the conversation, he once again felt sympathetic, while Cain was secretly observing. At this moment, Meal was thanking Oscar for his gift, expecting a warm response from her love interest, but Oscar was lost in thought, staring at Arya. Meal saw this scene and then took out a handkerchief she had sewn herself, giving it to her father. Arya, looking at her seemingly innocent sister, knew things weren't that simple, but still played along, praising Meal, who knew Meal would push her luck, calling Emma to take out handkerchiefs prepared for everyone except Arya. Trying to embarrass her, Lane couldn't bear to watch and quickly handed the handkerchief he received to her. Unexpectedly, Arya just smiled slightly, cleverly using the opportunity to defuse Meal's scheme. Another failure. A few days later, wanting to clarify the relationship between the handkerchief and Lane, Arya called Annie to take care of her skin, and under the pretext of taking her to a gathering, inquired about the origin of Meal's handkerchief. As expected, Annie casually mentioned that Meal had hired a teacher. Arya pondered this, knowing that these things had never happened before, and Meal hadn't participated in the embroidery, just casually stitched a few needles. Arya understood the time was ripe and gave Annie her exclusive gold badge. From this moment on, Meal's loyal servants gradually decreased. This man's master had taken a liking to the noble lady, so he frequently visited the mansion with gifts, just to catch her eye. However, Meal was somewhat hesitant. After all, her heart already belonged to someone else. Mother was always a bit worried, so she inquired about Lane's master's information again. However, he still couldn't disclose it, and stated that his master had encountered Meal by chance and developed feelings for her. Arya listened carefully on the side, wanting to use the hourglass to probe Lane's background, so she started deducing. She believed Lane's master must be a foreign nobleman, otherwise he would be the crown prince. Lane was somewhat surprised to hear this, not expecting Arya's thinking to be so meticulous. However, under her questioning, he still didn't reveal any useful information. Arya could only pretend not to care, while actually panicking inside. If this person was just a foolish nobleman, it would be fine, but if he became Meal's backer, it would certainly be a big problem in the future. At this moment, Lane glanced secretly, understanding in his heart. The next day, Arya got up from bed with sleepy eyes. Seeing her eyes were a bit swollen, Jessie quickly brought cool water to wipe her face. Arya was about to attend her first party as an adult. Annie appeared behind her, seemingly having put a lot of effort into this outing. She carefully inquired about Arya's intentions, unable to hide her inner excitement. Upon arriving at the tea party, the young ladies immediately noticed Annie standing behind Arya and naturally showered her with compliments. Seeing the opportunity was ripe, Arya got to the point, and began discussing the topic of coming-of-age ceremonies. Hearing this, the young ladies eagerly crowded around, wanting to tell Arya about Miss Sarah's experience. Just as they were talking, Sarah arrived late with a bouquet of flowers, apparently delayed by a messenger from the Marquis. The young ladies hurriedly asked Sarah about her coming-of-age ceremony. Sarah shyly said, at that time, her handkerchief fell to the ground. The Count picked it up and examined it carefully, suddenly expressing his desire to keep the handkerchief. So Sarah bashfully gave it to him, and subsequently accepted his invitation to dance. Unexpectedly, the seemingly cold Marquis had such delicate thoughts. Arya listened to Sarah's narration without surprise, because she knew that Sarah was destined to be with the Marquis. Then, changing the subject, she hoped Sarah would disregard the other party's status and be with them solely out of love or affection. After all, she only wished for Sarah's happiness. Sarah was deeply moved by this, and everyone present was delighted, except for the dumbfounded Annie. She was astonished by the idea of a commoner marrying into nobility. That's right, if she had this opportunity, she could definitely climb the social ladder to nobility. Arya clearly knew that only she could help her achieve this goal, and this was the significance of bringing Annie to the gathering. So what would Annie plan to do? This newly adult young girl was actually teaching her home tutor about love. Seemingly a novice, she was actually a beauty who had experienced countless men's pursuits. Sarah fantasized about the scene Arya described, feeling both happy and shy, planning to win over the Marquis in one fell swoop. Arya strategized, suggesting Sarah send him a pair of gloves, which would surely leave a lasting impression on the Marquis. Sarah praised Arya's good idea. In fact, these were all experiences from her conquests of numerous men. Just as Sarah was about to leave, she suddenly noticed a new carriage at the door. Upon closer inspection, it turned out to be Lien. He politely came up to inquire, wanting to have tea with Miss Meal and have a few words. Arya refused him entry on the grounds that she couldn't let Lien have tea with an unmarried lady without her guardian's consent. Her real intention was that she disapproved of Lien constantly giving gifts to Meal, so she wouldn't let the two meet alone. Sarah noticed Arya's expression wasn't good, which aroused her protective instincts, so she suggested that the four of them have tea together. Lien agreed, then handed over a gift prepared for Arya, another bouquet of tulips. Arya smiled slyly, immediately deducing from the color of the flowers that Lian's master was an imperial nobleman, which shocked Lian greatly. The three sat down to tea, and Arya was full of doubts. Could his master really be the crown prince? So she had Annie bring an hourglass, and began to interrogate Lian before her, wanting to know the purpose of his frequent visits to the mansion. It turned out his master valued Miele's ability to gather information, and the fur business cooperation with the Marquis was based on her advice. Arya's pupils shook with shock. But that was my idea. Has the relationship between my father and me never improved? To attribute all the credit to his own daughter, Arya trembled with anger. Lian continued, Miele doesn't seem as virtuous as rumored. Arya coldly mocked Miele, then could no longer contain her inner feelings, and exploded in public. This action obviously terrified Sarah half to death. Arya also realized her loss of composure, hurriedly flipped the hourglass, letting everything return to normal. She told herself to stay calm. Then in the long wait, Miele arrived late. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Lian immediately asked her opinion on casinos. Arya knew this was a probing question, but didn't expect Miele to know nothing at all. When she heard her say she wanted to build a statue for the crown prince at the casino entrance, Arya couldn't help but laugh. Lian was a bit embarrassed, and then asked Arya if she had any insights. To his surprise, Arya not only spoke knowledgeably but also subtly mocked Miele, who knew nothing, leaving Lian stunned. Miele also looked uncomfortable and at a loss. This man came to the mansion repeatedly to make money. He planned to discuss business matters with the count, and also asked for the opinion of the count's biological daughter. Miele, unexpectedly, she naively believed that light clothing would be the next popular commodity. Arya trembled with laughter after hearing this. It seems everyone would find this idea laughable. To ease the awkward atmosphere, father turned to ask Arya, imagining that his clever adopted daughter would give him the answer he wanted. But this time Arya held back, actually expressing agreement with Miele's suggestion. She didn't want to let these two pitiful figures reap the benefits without effort. Lian and father were slightly disappointed that Arya didn't take the bait. Arya felt that rather than letting them benefit without effort, it would be better to focus on reading and improving herself. At this moment, Annie burst in, wanting to ask for leave to see the festival. Arya agreed without hesitation. Soon it was the day of the festival. Seeing Annie's plain appearance, Arya panicked and quickly grabbed a few exquisite clothes. Only this way could make other maids envious. After Annie got dressed, she left happily. Just as Arya wanted to read quietly, she noticed Jessie standing behind her. After some inquiries, Jessie also wanted to attend the festival, but due to work reasons, she was too embarrassed to ask Arya for permission. Unexpectedly, Arya granted leave without even turning her head. Jessie was a bit worried, and she had a bright idea to suggest going to the festival together with Arya. The three of them strolled down the street, with Arya reminiscing about the past, still feeling a bit uneasy, but thankful that everything wouldn't happen again. He bought 2 skewers of grilled meat and shared them with the other 2. Sitting by the fountain listening to people sing about winter's end and spring's arrival, the groundwork for the revenge plan had been laid. But living to ruin someone else's life, would that truly bring happiness? Arya couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Yas spotted her in the crowd, and hurried over to strike up a conversation. She exchanged polite greetings, but was met with a cold look from Arya. She intended to act as if nothing had happened, but the man beside her had a kind of fatal attraction, forcing Arya to continue the conversation. At this moment, Jessie and the attendant also noticed them, preparing to draw their swords. Yas's accomplice suddenly appeared, whispering something in his ear, but Yas sent him away, seemingly wanting to chat with Arya a bit longer. So he took the opportunity to ask Arya about her attire. Why was it so plain? The implication being, why aren't you wearing the clothes I sent? But little did he know, he had mistaken the recipient of his gift from the very beginning. Arya found him perplexing and wanted to take this chance to slip away. But suddenly an explosion was heard in the distance. In the urgency of the moment, Yas grabbed Arya's hand and ran in the opposite direction of the crowd. This woman, panicked by the sound of the explosion, a strange man ran over and offered her his warm hand. No. This feeling made her heart race, a heartbeat she had never felt so out of control before. Yas held Arya's hand as they ran away from the crowd. Amidst the glow of the explosion and the cries of people, Arya felt the warmth of his palm, believing this hand to be like her salvation, tightly connecting them. They ran until they were out of breath. When Arya came to her senses, she abruptly let go of Yas's hand. She felt somewhat uncomfortable, thinking that she had been losing her rationality whenever she panicked lately, considering it absurd to view this man's hand as a lifeline. Yas awkwardly comforted her, offering her a handkerchief he had received at the festival, asking if she needed to wipe herself. Arya refused, thinking to herself if this person wanted to see her embarrassed. She came to her senses and realized they had run quite far, asking where they were. Yas, with a bright smile, told her that he had just led her away and didn't know where they were either. He placed the handkerchief in her hand. Arya was really frustrated, feeling that her irrationality had truly failed her. How could she give such a person an opportunity in the chaos? She looked around and found that no matter how she looked at it, this was an unfamiliar place. She suddenly became afraid, wondering if they had run to the outskirts of the city. She wanted to go back quickly, before she could give up. As she was about to leave, Yas asked where she was going. She expressed her desire to return but helplessly couldn't find the way back. Yas suggested they look over there, as the night sky seemed brighter in that direction. Arya embarrassedly stopped and walked along with him. Yas playfully asked if she needed him to carry her on his back, which startled her, causing her to shout, "What?" She was indeed very tired, but she was determined not to owe him any favors even if exhausted. She took off her high heels and walked briskly. Yas followed, laughing, asking if this was better than being carried by him. Arya puffed up with anger, and Yas closely followed, telling her that perhaps he could be useful to her. Arya denied this, sarcastically saying that trying to establish a good image in such a situation was completely impossible. Yas told her that she didn't understand him. Arya thought they were all the same. Yas denied this, saying he knew Miss Arya very well. Arya thought he had heard rumors about her, but Yas said something different. Arya became anxious, turning to glare at him fiercely, but Yas looked at her with a very affectionate gaze. Arya's heart suddenly began to race. She started to feel that every time she met these eyes, she couldn't look away, as if seeing a beautiful blue, mysterious yet gentle. Yas took advantage of her distraction to lean close to her ear, telling her that she would soon know who he was, and when she became close to him by chance, he confidently said they would meet again soon. Then the guards found Arya. After a series of comforting words, they told her the festival was almost over. Arya felt that everything that had just happened was unreal, but it wasn't a dream. She then returned to the festival with the guards. After returning, the guards told Arya the reason for the explosion. They discussed it there, while Arya was still thinking about the boy from earlier, speculating that he might be a nobleman from the countryside. The more she thought about it, the more angry she became. The guard interrupted her, telling her what they had just heard about Miss Elia. It was said that Elia had written a letter to Miss Frederick. This woman's life story was truly tragic. Her husband had committed suicide, unable to bear the pressure of enormous debt, leaving her with no choice but to serve nobles to repay the debt. Not only did the debt not decrease at all, but she also lost the child in her womb due to overwork. A nobleman discovered this tragic woman, and recognizing her, promoted her to be his exclusive maid. But even though she was formally employed as a high-level maid, the nobleman's wife passed away due to excessive blood loss during childbirth. This woman had no choice but to take on the responsibility of raising this girl. The little girl grew up to be a sweet and lovely young woman. The girl went to visit Miss Frederick, who entertained her warmly. The girl was already eager to see Oscar, her fiancé, but Miss Frederick wanted to spend more time alone with the girl, so she asked Oscar to come back later. Upon hearing this, the girl's face lit up with a sweet smile. Miss Frederick praised the girl, telling her that although Oscar usually obeyed her, she wouldn't want his partner to feel burdened by him. She then praised the girl for being a perfect wife, but the girl's face fell, telling the lady that it was difficult to meet with Mr. Oscar often, feeling guilty that her abilities were not enough to help her husband. Miss Frederick reassured her not to worry, saying she would surely get engaged to Oscar, as she herself hoped. The girl's sweet smile bloomed again, joy uncontrollably spreading across her face. Gaining Miss Frederick's approval was a rare achievement, as she was now the top candidate to be the crown princess. If she could become family with her, no one would bully the girl anymore. Shortly after, Oscar returned. Oscar was somewhat surprised and looked guiltily at Miss Frederick. The girl quickly greeted Oscar, showing concern for his well-being. However, Oscar seemed to be somewhat averse to her actions. Miss Frederick muttered beside them, stating that they were meant to be together for life. But Oscar responded speechlessly, saying he wasn't even engaged yet. The lady laughed, saying that although the girl wasn't of age, Oscar shouldn't be so rigid. Upon hearing this, the girl's heart instantly blossomed, as she began to fantasize about the wonderful days of entering noble life. No one would dare bully her. There would be no blemishes on her life, and in a few years, it would be natural for her to become a member here. Miss Frederick and Oscar then left. On the way home, The lady kept reminding Oscar to get closer to the girl, saying that even if she became the crown princess, they should still maintain close relationships with other powerful nobles. Oscar still had reservations. Miss Frederick sensed something was amiss and mentioned the rumor about Oscar having close contact with a prostitute's daughter. Oscar was shocked upon hearing this. Miss Frederick saw through something and gave Oscar a merciless reply, along with some sarcastic remarks. Oscar hurriedly tried to explain something, but Miss Frederick didn't give him a chance to speak, telling him to obey, implying that he wouldn't have the right to make his own decisions in the future. Oscar felt wronged, as he wasn't like the rumors described. A few days later, the girl received a letter from Oscar. The maids were all praising Oscar for being so attentive to the girl. The girl humbly accepted the letter, her heart bursting with joy, followed by another round of flattery from the maids. But at this moment, the girl's expression fell. It turned out that in the letter, Oscar told her the bad news that he wouldn't be able to correspond with her anymore. This was a seemingly ordinary farewell letter, yet it concerned this woman's future life. Her entire mental state collapsed, and the maids around her were like ants on a hot pan. In her heart, this woman resentfully repeated Oscar's name over and over again. Mistakenly, a maid rushed into her room, telling her that her sister downstairs had also received a letter, but her sister's letter was completely different from hers. In the letter, Oscar had written some lovey-dovey words that they couldn't believe were written by Oscar himself. It must have been ghostwritten by Miss Frederick. The woman suddenly realized that she had always thought that as long as she held on to Oscar, everything would be solved, but she had forgotten about this troublesome lady. Whether her sister could marry Oscar depended entirely on this lady. Even if Oscar was still willing to write letters to this woman, it wouldn't solve anything. The woman knelt on the ground and cried in despair. Later at the dinner table, this woman saw her sister's shining headdress and displayed an extreme expression, her heart full of hatred towards her. The sister was chatting with guests, with bursts of cheerful laughter. This woman's heart was itching, thinking about twisting her sister's neck and then running away. The guests were talking to the sister about tax matters, and the sister naively wanted to solve it through simple personal connections. This woman sarcastically remarked from the side that without Mr. Lean, the family couldn't do anything. Then the woman suggested building a warehouse near the capital, so they could transport things there when needed, greatly reducing taxes. Mr. Lean was quite shocked after hearing this. They suddenly realized that this suggestion was very useful. The sister seemed a bit flustered after hearing this and immediately pointed out some issues, but the woman quickly refuted them. The sister was exclaiming about the expensive fur tax, while the guard beside her flattered her, saying it was because he had predicted that fur would become popular that the tax appeared. Mr. Lean couldn't stand it anymore and quickly changed the subject to celebrate finding a solution. The woman thought to herself that even if she could know the future, there was nothing she could do. She had only become a clever little dot, unable to solve important problems or change anything. She flung herself onto the bed, showing a sad and helpless expression, because even if she begged Oscar not to stop corresponding, nothing would change. Even if she had outshone her sister today, it was useless. Was she just going to lie awake all night, afraid of getting her neck chopped off? Was her life just going to come to a standstill like this? This woman dressed up elaborately, planning to meet her fiancé's sister. Under her father's instructions, she left in a carriage. Annie watched all of this, sneered, and grumbled as she reported this to Alia. Unexpectedly, Alia wasn't interested at all and looked extremely haggard. After all, she had been crying about Oscar's matter last night. When Alia asked about Meal's attire, Annie pointed out that it was all clothing sent by Aishi's. Alia sighed. Today was Aishas's birthday. Meal and other nobles were invited to attend, which would determine Aishas's future status, while she would struggle and die again. Thinking of this, Alia felt powerless to change anything and fell asleep after making an excuse. Annie and Jessie looked at each other, worried about their young mistress's health condition. Meal arrived at Aishas's birthday venue and sat beside the party host, mingling successfully. Countless noble ladies came to talk to Aishis. Seeing this, Meal came up with a plan and used her father to steer the conversation towards herself. The two chatted happily. Oscar, however, arrived late under everyone's gaze. He politely greeted everyone, his handsome appearance captivating Meal. After some simple greetings, Meal believed that Oscar's heart was gradually returning to the right track. Aishis took the opportunity to play matchmaker. and although marriage was a foregone conclusion, Meal still felt shy. At this moment, the butler hurriedly came to report, unexpectedly, the crown prince had suddenly arrived. Everyone was shocked to hear this, and then immediately displayed the appropriate demeanor, all believing that the marriage between the crown prince and Aishi's was natural. Meal naively thought that the crown prince had really come to wish Aishi's a happy birthday. Only Oscar felt something was wrong, because his sister's actions today were clearly putting pressure on the royal family. The crown prince's arrival surely wasn't a good thing. Aesis was also somewhat embarrassed and angry, not knowing what this man was up to, but for the sake of appearances, they could only bow respectfully to him. Unexpectedly, Yas didn't take it seriously at all. After hastily greeting them, he looked straight at Meal, who was standing next to Aesis. All along, he had mistaken Alia for Meal. Now, looking at the woman before him, she was much shorter than he remembered. Meal was at a loss, completely unable to understand the situation. Aesis was also confused. The crown prince had come to her birthday party to find Meal? Could Meal have a private relationship with him? Just as Yas was proudly announcing his identity, Meal looked up in confusion. Yas widened his eyes, realizing the woman standing before him wasn't the one he had been longing for. She was devastated inside. Where could her beloved be now? This woman was so bad, pretending to be kind and gentle while complaining behind others' backs. After the crown prince left, Meal's legs instantly went weak. Fortunately, Oscar was there to support her. Aesis quickly questioned Meal, asking what had happened between her and the crown prince, but Meal said she didn't know what had happened. This was her first time meeting His Highness, and she didn't know what the real young lady meant. Seeing Meal still sobbing, Aesis felt sympathetic and showed concern for the child. So Aesis asked Oscar to take Meal to rest, but after Meal left, she immediately muttered behind her back, thinking children were really troublesome. On the other hand, she also thought this was a good opportunity, because Oscar liked to care for pitiful people. If Oscar could become attentive to Meal through this chance, it would be a good thing. After taking care of Meal's emotions, Aesis began to ease the awkwardness brought by the crown prince earlier, smiling at the guests and making harmless jokes. Everyone said that she was indeed worthy of being the future crown princess, behaving very understandingly. Secretly, Aesis sent her subordinates to find out what had happened between Meal and the crown prince. Aesis had a bad feeling that something seemed to be slipping out of control. On the other side, Alia was eating delicious desserts prepared by the servants, constantly trying to comfort herself. In the evening, Alia saw Oscar bringing Meal back. Meal's father scolded Oscar for bringing Meal back too late. Oscar explained that there was a little accident at the party, and afterwards Meal fell asleep, so he didn't have the heart to wake her up. The count didn't pursue the matter further, but emphasized to Oscar that they were still minors and not yet married. Oscar was about to say goodbye and leave, but unexpectedly, the count asked him to stay for the night. Alia didn't expect that Oscar wouldn't even look at her. Alia thought she had already sorted out her emotions, but she didn't expect that seeing Oscar would still make her feel sad. Late at night, Alia couldn't sleep, so she walked out of her room to take a stroll, unexpectedly encountering Oscar. Just as she was about to greet him, Oscar turned and entered his room. Alia felt she couldn't miss such an opportunity, so she used the hourglass. This time she called out to Oscar, crying and telling him not to abandon her. Alia buried her head in Oscar's chest, mumbling and sobbing, but Oscar didn't seem to want to respond to Alia. Would Oscar agree to Alia's plea? Waking up the next morning, Alia didn't want to accept what she had done last night. She hadn't expected to say those things to Oscar, and to lean on him. However, last night Oscar had also expressed sympathy for Alia. After all, she was alone in such a big mansion without anyone to trust. After Alia fell asleep, Oscar expressed his true feelings, saying he hoped Alia wouldn't worry, that all his choices were for her. If he could become Meal's husband, they could become a family, and Meal wouldn't be able to bully her anymore. He also hoped that one day, Alia would understand his heart, but for Alia now, her heart was filled with pain, feeling ashamed for desperately clinging to Oscar. But just then, Alia heard that Meal seemed to have called her friends over to boast again. Alia's servant came, excitedly saying that on the day Meal returned with Oscar, her eyes were very swollen, because that day the crown prince appeared and questioned Meal. Moreover, he heard from a servant who used to work here that the gift Meal received was prepared by Essis's maid. It was then that Alia realized Oscar hadn't done anything. It was all Essis's doing. Learning the truth, Alia suddenly felt energized, and her body suddenly grew taller. Alia happily went out and happened to meet Meal and her friends. Meal said she hadn't seen Alia for a long time, smiling and saying that if Alia wasn't feeling well, she should stay in her room. Alia didn't bother to respond to Meal's sarcasm, saying she just wanted to go out for some fresh air today and buy some clothes. Alia smiled and said to the girls present, "I don't know why, but I've suddenly grown taller again." She then looked at Meal and said, "Some people, even when they're older, still have a childlike stature. Such a growth rate is really enviable." Meal didn't show any reaction, but inside she really disliked Alia. On the way, Alia thought about how using the hourglass would make her body tired, but she didn't know why. Her body would suddenly grow after each use. Alia realized that reversing time might be exchanging life, so she decided to use the hourglass less. While buying clothes, Alia not only bought for herself but also for her 2 servants. Afterwards, they went to the Flower Mountain Cafe. One of the servants, Annie, said she had always wanted to come, but only nobles could enter. Then, Alia asked her servant Jessie to buy her a newspaper, checking on the life of the newspaper seller she had helped before. In the newspaper, she saw a news article stating, the mastermind behind the robbery of noble clients was a foreign high-ranking aristocrat. Alia suddenly realized that she might be able to use this information. He took the hourglass, planning to go to the casino to make money. At that moment, a man downstairs saw him. Who was this man? How would it feel to suddenly receive flowers from a stranger? And a handsome one at that? Embarrassed or flustered? Joyful or disgusted? Alia sat in the cafe, listening to Annie talk about her brother's voice, thinking it might be helpful. She decided to take Annie to the casino later. Just then, a man with flowers arrived, and Alia was shocked because this man was none other than Yas, who had saved her that day. They didn't really have any connection, but Yas seemed very familiar. At this moment, the maid secretly told Alia that Yas had been standing downstairs for a long time, watching their direction. So Alia decided to have a good chat with this man of unknown identity to see what Yas was really up to. Yas, however, spoke in riddles, telling Alia that it was just a coincidence they met, and casually gave Alia the tulips he was holding. Alia was merciless, stating that she had received such tulips before, and because they were specially cultivated by the royal family, they were only sold in flower shops near the palace. The palace was not close to here, so this coincidental meeting seemed too coincidental. Yas wasn't put off by Alia's unfriendly words and still smiled, saying he just saw Miss Alia on the way and quickly bought a bouquet of flowers to follow her, but didn't expect Miss Alia to remember the flowers he sent last time. Alia was momentarily speechless, as it was clearly Lean who sent the flowers last time. What did it have to do with Yas? And despite her speaking this way, Yas could still sit there calmly. Could it be that he was so captivated by her beauty that he couldn't help himself? Yas suddenly changed the subject, saying that his real purpose for coming was his interest in the Rost fur consultant. Alia was shocked, as Rost would definitely not leak this information. Could it be that big-mouthed Lean had been talking about it everywhere? Alia cursed Lean 800 times in her heart. Yas changed the subject again, saying that because he had heard Alia was very intelligent, he wanted to invite her to a gathering to discuss some political and economic matters. Alia felt it was inappropriate, as she wasn't familiar with this man, and he was inviting her to a gathering out of the blue, and such gatherings were usually full of men. Alia asked Yas if he wasn't worried about damaging her reputation. Yas told Alia that this gathering was just for academic discussion, and he looked forward to Alia showcasing her knowledge. Although there would be mostly men, they absolutely wouldn't gossip, because those without manners wouldn't be qualified to attend the gathering. Alia was somewhat tempted. In a feudal patriarchal society, for her as a woman to attend such a gathering was a rare opportunity. But could this man in front of her really be trusted? When Alia returned home, Lean came over again, very attentively giving Meal a bunch of lilies, leaving Alia speechless. But then Lean turned and gave Alia a bunch of tulips, telling her these were from the master's garden. Alia looked at the familiar tulips, and was shocked for a moment. If you had a time hourglass, would you travel back to the past? If everything could start over, how would you choose? Can the change in the trajectory of events bring back hope from the bottom of your heart? Alia was still pondering the meaning behind Lean's words, why he had to tell her about the flowers from the master's garden, when her thoughts were interrupted by her father, the Count. The Count told Alia that Lean had feelings for her, which could be considered a good marriage. Alia was shocked, because Lean was frivolous, and he had been interested in Meal not long ago. Most importantly, Lean was just an attendant. Although she had long been disappointed, she never thought her father would actually sell his daughter for benefits. At this moment, her sister Meal added fuel to the fire, claiming that Aaliyah and Lean were a good match. Aaliyah immediately retorted, "This blessing is for you. Do you want it?" Meal pretended not to hear and said, "Has Sister Aaliyah forgotten? I already have Oscar." Aaliyah continued to provoke her. "Oscar hasn't appeared for who knows how long. Even gifts are sent by the maid." Seeing his two daughters engaged in a war of words, the Count father also realized something was wrong and quickly tried to smooth things over, saying, "It seems Aaliyah doesn't have any intention of getting married yet." The meal ended in a cloud of smoke. After Lean left, just as Aaliyah was about to rest, Lean unexpectedly returned, giving Aaliyah a letter, saying his master insisted that Aaliyah read it. Aaliyah opened it, and it was actually written by Yas. Lean asked Aaliyah if she could agree to his master's request. Aaliyah finally understood that it wasn't Lean who was interested in her, but Lean's master, Yas. But there was one thing Aaliyah didn't understand. Why had he sent so many gifts to Meal before? Lean smiled awkwardly, claiming it was a case of mistaken identity, and hoped Aaliyah wouldn't take it to heart. Although things were clear now, Aaliyah found it even harder to make a decision. Firstly, she didn't know Yas's identity, and secondly, Yas probably wouldn't be interested in her because she was very foolish. Lean was shocked, not understanding why Aaliyah would be so self-deprecating. As from his perspective, Miss Aaliyah was very intelligent. Aaliyah thought to herself, "That's because of the hourglass." However, Aaliyah still agreed to attend the gathering. The noble ladies gathered together, asking Aaliyah where her love experience came from, as she had easily brought Sarah and the Marquis together. Aaliyah could only say that she used to be a commoner and was very familiar with these love techniques, but in her heart, she knew that Sarah and the Marquis were destined to be together, and she had only given them a little push. Aaliyah felt a bit lost at this moment. When did she start to have so little confidence? The labels from her previous life now brewed with the hourglass in this life. But when would her wavering heart finally collapse? When a group of people are arguing, what's the smartest choice? Is it to watch the drama unfold, or to offer the most reasonable suggestion to mediate? While the maids were discussing which dress Aaliyah should wear to the gathering, Aaliyah suddenly suggested that they should be her accompanying maids. Annie was both happy and excited. At the same time, Aaliyah decided to recruit new maids, but at this moment, Meal sent over the spy Barry. Aaliyah had no choice but to accept. Recalling how Barry had sowed discord by her side in her previous life, Aaliyah felt very displeased, repeatedly asking Barry to serve her tea, complaining it's either too hot or too cold, either spilled or too full, and instructing Annie to properly train this new maid. Arya arrived on time for Yas's gathering. As soon as she entered, she indeed saw many nobles. Everyone politely introduced themselves, while Arya simply said to call her by her name. They sat together discussing casino operation issues. Although Yas spoke naturally, everyone's attitude towards him was very respectful. Arya couldn't help but wonder about Yas's identity. Someone suggested that since casinos are restricted and difficult to manage, and no longer used for entertainment, they should be closed. However, most of the extreme noble faction opposed. First, casino taxes are a lucrative source of income. Second, because other countries covet this business, and the Crown Prince is personally managing the casinos, it's an effective tool to win over the nobility. Finally, if casinos are closed all at once, the tighter the grip, the more counterproductive it becomes. Illegal gambling would flourish, and the wealth gap would widen. Someone proposed limiting the operating amount, but how to enforce it? Whether nobles would honestly report their assets is also a big issue. The debate reached a fever pitch. Arya, who had been silent on the sidelines, suddenly suggested, the casino's closure is inevitable. The best solution is to pass this hot potato to the nobility. Everyone suddenly objected, stating it would damage the Crown Prince's reputation, and people would blame His Highness for poor management. Arya was very surprised. Wasn't the noble faction always at odds with the Crown Prince? Arya told everyone, although from a short-term economic perspective, casinos can be profitable, in the long run, it's detrimental to the country and economic benefits, and there will be loopholes in managing funds and human resources. Rather than being indecisive at this time, it's better to directly transfer the casino to others' jurisdiction. The people would instead praise His Highness's decision as correct due to his wisdom and decisiveness. Most importantly, the noble faction is originally a malignant pet to the royal family. Giving them this seemingly attractive casino appears to be the royal family currying favor with the nobility, but in reality, it's weakening them. Isn't it a win-win situation? Everyone was impressed by Arya's wisdom, but the radicals still asked, why is Arya so certain that the casino will fail? At this moment, Yas suddenly stood up and adopted Arya's suggestion. Everyone fell silent, and the meeting ended. Yas kept Arya behind to praise her, but Arya said, "Don't try to get away with it, Mr. Yas. Who exactly are you?" The man before her was both familiar and strange. Unknown what kind of heart was hidden beneath the handsome exterior. The more Arya couldn't figure him out, the more fascinated Yas became with her, and Yas realized this, so he concealed his identity in various ways, but then changed his approach, feeling his desire to know Arya was too eager, fearing it might be counterproductive. Arya was a bit speechless. This person didn't seem to be attracted by her appearance. Yas pondered for a while, believing Arya had unique insights into current trends, and all those invited to this gathering were such people. Is this guy a collector of intellectuals? Arya couldn't help but mock, so she continued to inquire about Yas's true identity. Looking at Arya's beautiful face, Yas knew that even if he revealed his identity as the crown prince now, it wouldn't be of any help to Arya, so he bowed his head deeply, asking Arya to give him more time. Right now, Yas was just a mysterious supporter deeply attracted by Arya's intelligence and wit. Hearing these moving words, Arya's face suddenly turned red. She became unable to look directly at Yas's face, his azure eyes gentle and clear. The initiative gradually being taken by Yas. To cover up her embarrassment, Arya turned her head away, her intuition telling her this man had no ill intentions. Although she intended to get to the bottom of it each time, she was no match for Yas's elegant refusals. At this point, it didn't matter anymore. Arya turned and walked up the stairs. "What does the lady think of me?" Faced with Yas's inquiry, Arya voiced her speculation, believing Yas must be His Highness the Prince. But how could someone engaged to a palace maid be running around? Before Arya could finish, Yas approached from behind, wanting to properly praise this young lady. Arya quickly covered her face with her hat, stating her conclusion. Yas was just a noble she didn't know. Hearing this, Yas seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. He invited Arya to attend such gatherings again next time. Although Arya said she'd consider it, she had already made up her mind. Returning to the mansion, Meal, seeing a large bouquet of tulips, concluded it was from Lien for Arya, so she and her father arbitrarily assumed Lien had taken a liking to Arya, even asking her mother's opinion. Seeing this, Arya immediately changed the subject to the warehouse matter. Seeing Meal's bitchy behavior, Arya understood time was of the essence. She decided to forge her own path. A few days later, she appeared at the casino, dressed elegantly. With Annie, Arya ordered a glass of wine, observed from the second floor for a while, then decided to go downstairs to test the waters. She kept winning for several days using the hourglass, which made the onlookers uneasy. While receiving praise from those around her, the hourglass beside her kept turning over and over, but side effects followed. How would Arya deal with this? If you had an hourglass that could reverse time, what would you use it for? Arya, at the casino, used the hourglass to make a fortune. At this moment, she was exhausted, and her continuous winning had attracted envy. She would win once and quickly leave each time, but today she was surrounded and blocked by others. Many gamblers hoped to get some gambling tips from Arya. In this critical moment, Annie and Arya had to escape separately, as the pursuers' footsteps got closer and closer, just as Arya was about to be caught. At that moment, a man wearing a golden lion mask appeared. He led Arya into a private room. The perceptive Arya sensed something unusual, the voice sounding somewhat familiar. Seeing his disguise about to be seen through, Arthur immediately turned his back and made excuses. The gamblers passed by the room, and Arya didn't dare to breathe. Just as she was about to leave, Arthur called out to her. He believed there were still safety concerns outside, so he kept Arya in the room. Arthur opened the door, had his attendants drive away all the gamblers. While pretending to be unconcerned, he inquired about Arya's gambling secrets. The polite attitude made Arya feel comfortable. She could sense that the man in the lion mask had no ill intentions, only the curiosity of a spectator, and didn't seem to be a strange person. Aaliyah calmly spun her lies, claiming she simply believed in her abilities and that luck was part of skill. Arthur was stunned. At that moment, there was a knock on the door outside. It seemed the gamblers had been successfully driven away. Yas was speechless. "Who told you to be so efficient?" The attendant, being straightforward, actually said, "Thank you." With no reason to keep Aaliyah any longer, Yas had to politely see her out. Afterwards, he removed his mask and discussed the next steps with his attendant. It seems he had set a trap earlier, falsely claiming he felt burdened by managing the casino, hoping Vigo would voluntarily buy the casino he was running. He didn't expect it to work so quickly. Yas further planned to let the nobles use the casino more boldly, then close it down. By then, the casino would no longer belong to the crown prince, and the nobles' internal strife would surely be a spectacular show, exploiting humans' unbridled greed for property. The crown prince decided to use this opportunity to teach them a lesson. However, after the truth comes out, the Rost family's use of the customs warehouse tax issue would be difficult to handle. Current laws couldn't restrict it, and it's unknown which nobody suggested it. Seeing Vika's indirect criticism before him, Yas was furious but dared not speak, only able to drive him out. He then sat alone, lost in thought, once again recalling Aaliyah's face. Charming girl, where will you lead me? Meanwhile, Aaliyah returned to her mansion to remove her makeup. Since she had earned enough money, there was no reason to return to the casino. So, she instructed Annie to bring her brother, starting her next plan. This man was called Andro. He was called by his sister to help. Faced with Aaliyah's request, Andro was confused, because his task was to buy sugar, as much as possible. Aaliyah's goal was to monopolize sugar. After all, sugar was one of the luxuries of the nobility. Seizing the market opportunity would surely bring endless wealth. Aaliyah attended a tea party for noble ladies, where they discussed recent events. Faced with this sudden gathering, Aaliyah knew well that these small families without territories couldn't develop trade, so they could only come to curry favor with the count. Starting with those small families who initiated monopoly trades with the noble faction as their backing, Aaliyah had candidates in mind, but on second thought, the noble faction wouldn't attack her, so it must be the prince's party. Could the prince's party be using foreigners? Thinking of this, Aaliyah's head started to ache, because once involved, it would be hard to extricate herself. Aaliyah was so lost in thought that she couldn't even hear Sarah calling her. She was startled out of her reverie. Seeing Aaliyah's troubled expression, Sarah thought she was worried about her father, so she tightly grasped her hands. Seeing Sarah's sincere manner, Aaliyah could only play along, putting on a pitiful expression. It's worth noting that even if the Rost family fell, the remaining property would be enough to sustain them for 3 generations. Sarah quietly told Aaliyah that she had actually been confessed to by the Marquis, and took the opportunity to invite Aaliyah to dinner to thank her for everything she had done. Her investment had finally paid off, and Aaliyah was overjoyed. Sometime later, Aaliyah attended Yas's small gathering as usual. As expected, the meeting's content was all about discussing the nobles who had their clients stolen. But contrary to expectations, these people seemed particularly happy about targeting the noble faction. Aaliyah was confused, knowing that quite a few of those present were nobles themselves. Did everyone present have a masochistic tendency? Just as Aaliyah was drinking water to quench her thirst, Lane suddenly said, "Viscount Vigo has bought the Crown Prince's casino." This shocked Aaliyah, and everyone stared at him. Yas calmly turned to Aaliyah. "Woman, what makes you think I wouldn't? Abu, what makes you think the Crown Prince wouldn't sell the casino?" Aaliyah recalled her previous memories, when the Crown Prince was heavily criticized by the public for closing the casino due to poor management. Of course, Aaliyah couldn't possibly say these things out loud, so she could only make up an excuse to brush it off. Yas continued, "Suppose I, not assuming the Crown Prince, only managed the casino briefly, then sold it to a suitable candidate. Wouldn't the result be different?" Aaliyah pondered carefully, instantly understanding the prince's party's intentions. However, given the prince's abilities, wouldn't making such a decision and giving such instructions be a bit far-fetched? Aaliyah thoughtfully walked upstairs, but was called back by Yas. After their eyes met, there was endless praise for Aaliyah again. The recent open-hearted conversations had made her feel comfortable. If only Oscar could be like this. In the Fey mansion, Neil was dressed up, ready to welcome the court lady. The carriage slowly moved forward, with crowds on the street discussing the news of Vigo's acquisition of the casino. Sitting in the carriage, Isis was furious, thinking that compared to acquiring the casino at a low price, using the casino to continue suppressing the Crown Prince would have been a better strategy. Who was the nobody who came up with this bad idea? The noble faction had been outmaneuvered. Neil had been waiting respectfully at the mansion for a long time, overjoyed at Isis's arrival. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Isis presented high-quality red tea as a gift. The two sat in the courtyard, chatting in the afternoon sun. Isis noticed the brooch on Meal's chest, identical to Oscar's. Meal was visibly pleased to hear this, but the truth was quite different. The cunning Isis had long known that Oscar's brooch was given by Aaliyah, so she had someone make an identical one to give to Meal. Meal was an excellent actor, able to put on such an act even knowing it wasn't from Oscar. This was how a noble lady should behave, catering to those of higher status, oppressing the lowly commoners, being able to bend and stretch as needed. In contrast, Count Rost seemed casual, actually allowing a prostitute to marry into a noble family. Isis secretly cursed Count Rost, then changed the subject, expressing a desire to meet Aaliyah, to see what kind of face this vicious woman had. Unexpectedly, the radiance Aaliyah emitted upon her appearance was so bright that Isis could barely open her eyes. After a brief curtsy, Aaliyah sat opposite Isis. The vast difference in their status, coupled with Isis's various challenges, was like a hungry wolf about to devour a chihuahua before it. Aaliyah was somewhat resentful that Annie hadn't told her about Isis's visit. However, as long as she wasn't caught, she could smoothly return to her room to sleep. As expected, Isis began to ask Aaliyah about the taste of the tea, intending to humiliate her. Surprisingly, Aaliyah not only accurately described the tea's flavor but also named the tea. Isis felt embarrassed and let Aaliyah return to her room, thanks to using the hourglass. Otherwise she would have faced merciless mockery from the two cruel women. After this incident, Aaliyah clearly understood that Isis was a dangerous presence for her. Annie hurriedly came to apologize and brought news from her brother to Aaliyah. Looking at the contents of the letter, it was clear that sugar prices had increased dozens of times, and conflicts among nobles were becoming frequent. At the dining table, Meal was completely unaccustomed to the desserts before him, and Roast also understood that food without sugar wouldn't taste good. Unfortunately, the new sugar transporter had been held up at customs by the crown prince. Hearing Roast's complaints, Aaliyah put herself in the prince's shoes, thinking she wouldn't sympathize with these greedy puppets either if she were in his position. Meanwhile, due to Tang Manor monopolizing sugar, countless nobles rushed to buy it, purchasing sugar at 30 or even 40 times the original price. Conflicts among nobles began to intensify, and a bloodless war had begun. Now that sugar was monopolized, it cost 30 times the original price. Annie was at a loss. If the young lady sold it herself, wouldn't she make even more profit? But Aaliyah didn't think so. Her goal was merely to make the nobles fight over sugar, not to gain high profits from it. Annie was confused, but Aaliyah suddenly called out to Barry, who was hiding nearby, angrily questioning her. Why couldn't she adjust the tea's temperature properly even now? And why didn't the cookies have any sweetness? Barry was about to tell Aaliyah about the high sugar prices when she was scolded harshly. Annie also fanned the flames, but her words reminded Aaliyah that in the past, when she found food unpalatable, she would buy perfumes as a substitute. The sweet scent could make people feel comfortable. As she pondered this, she suddenly realized she hadn't tormented Barry enough, so she continued to order her to do other tasks. Aaliyah looked through books and found that the perfume she had previously bought in Bowen's shop, although sweet-smelling, couldn't expand its storefront due to lack of funds. So after perfume became popular, it was quickly devalued by the nobles. "I'll choose you then." Aaliyah decided to give him a chance. Sometime later, Baron Bowen received a letter from Aaliyah, requesting only 30% of the profits, as if she knew the perfume would definitely sell well. However, it was signed as investor. A few weeks later, Aaliyah received a gift from Bowen, expressing gratitude for her foresight in the letter, and including a cravat, a gift typically given to men. Aaliyah pondered, realizing Bowen had assumed she was male, but her identity couldn't be widely known. After thinking for a moment, she immediately sent Annie to prepare a carriage, and went shopping at a clothing store. Dressed in her new outfit, the handsome Aaliyah entered Bowen's perfume shop and asked to see the owner by name. Bowen sat face to face with Aaliyah, instantly captivated by the beautiful woman before him. The thick-skinned Aaliyah met with him without knowing who he was. Aaliyah was speechless. When she revealed her identity to Bowen, he slapped himself, ashamed for having feelings for an underage girl, making a complete fool of himself. Aaliyah continued to ask Bowen about the product's development prospects. Unexpectedly, he wanted to sell at affordable prices, allowing ordinary people to enjoy noble perfumes. Aaliyah smiled slightly. realizing she hadn't invested in the wrong person. However, for Bowen to say such things to a beautiful woman he had just met, his face instantly turned red. He then spoke about his unconditional trust in Aaliyah and the anonymous investor behind her. Aaliyah calmly took off her cravat and casually placed it around Bowen's neck. When he saw the cravat clearly, he instantly understood that the mysterious investor was Aaliyah standing before him. The man was somewhat flustered, realizing he had mistaken his behind-the-scenes boss for a man. Looking at the gift he had sent to Aaliyah being returned unchanged, Baron Bowen was astonished to discover that Aaliyah was the mysterious investor. He hurriedly chased after her, apologizing for his rudeness. Coincidentally, Annie was waiting in the hallway, having already purchased all the perfumes Aaliyah needed. Hearing the word, buy, Bowen was thunderstruck. The investor wanted to buy? Taking them directly wouldn't be too much, so he immediately had a luxurious perfume gift set prepared, including almost all the styles in the store, and gave it to Aaliyah as a gift. He also gave her a bunch of the store's new product, flowers that could maintain their fragrance for a long time, and another bunch to Annie standing nearby. Annie seemed at a loss, happily accepting the white bouquet before her. Aaliyah glanced secretly, thinking this was a good opportunity to promote Annie, so she began introducing her. This was how Baron Bowen and Annie met. The same polite compliments made Annie blush repeatedly. Aaliyah teased from the side, could it be that Baron Bowen has no resistance to beautiful women? She also quietly told her to keep her true identity a secret. On the way back, Annie became infatuated. It seemed that Bowen was the type of man who charmed imperceptibly. Though it didn't work on Aaliyah, it was a fatal blow to the innocent Annie. Seeing Annie's excited state, Aaliyah thought they would make a good couple. If this marriage were to happen, it would only benefit the surrounding maids, including Aaliyah herself. The question was how to help Annie attract Bowen. The carriage soon arrived at the floating island. The sandalwood perfumes weren't moved to Aaliyah's room but were placed in the living room on the first floor. Aaliyah told Annie to distribute all of these to the maids, and if the perfumes were all used up, she should send Annie to purchase more. Annie was thrilled to hear this, as seeing the Baron she had been thinking about would make her happy for a whole day. So after a while, when the perfumes were almost gone, Annie happily dressed up and went out to buy perfume from Bowen's store. Bowen was delighted to see Annie's arrival, but the conversation revolved around Aaliyah, which left Annie feeling discouraged. By evening, a dispirited Annie headed home. Aaliyah sensed something was wrong and asked her about the conversation. When Aaliyah learned that Annie felt she wasn't as attractive as her, she instantly understood Bowen's words. She then began to brainwash Annie. Love is about weighing pros and cons. You don't love Bowen, but his wealth. Just like that, the young Annie was no longer heartbroken, her mind filled only with Miss Aaliyah's words. In the evening, Neil still had no appetite for food due to not getting candy, but Aaliyah ate with relish. Had the flavor of the seasoning returned? As she pondered this, she suddenly smelled a fragrance on the maid, and immediately understood everything. It seems everyone in the mansion will be at my disposal. That day, Lane came to visit, again bringing boxes of gifts. Aaliyah thought they were for her, but they turned out to be for Neil again. Just then, Lane had a male servant bring Aaliyah's gift to her room. Aaliyah absent-mindedly agreed, not noticing the door being quietly closed. Then the servant removed his hood, revealing it was Yas. But Aaliyah wasn't shocked at all, as Yas's sudden appearances were common. With no gatherings lately, their feelings for each other had deepened. This time Yas came for no other reason, but solely to see Aaliyah. What could be more important than that? Hearing this, Aaliyah's face turned red. But why give all the candy to Neil? Yas explained, it was because she wanted to spend more time with Aaliyah. Aaliyah felt relieved hearing this. Arthur realized Aaliyah was jealous of Neil. Seeing herself exposed, Aaliyah's face reddened again. Was it really because of manipulation? The words he spoke couldn't even convince himself. Yas took the opportunity to quietly approach me, vowing to only give gifts to her from now on. He was then called away by Lane, who had arrived. Shortly after, Jessie rushed in to bring afternoon tea for the young lady. Aaliyah casually opened the gift box, finding it contained a gorgeous outfit. She wondered, could this be a special gift for mistaking her identity earlier? Aaliyah smiled happily. Now that Oscar had no more use, it was time to find a new path. Annie handed Aaliyah a stack of letters from Baron Bowen for her to review. Seeing Annie's excitement, Aaliyah guessed correctly in one sentence. The Baron's attitude towards her had changed. It seems with her help, their relationship was developing well. Annie praised Aaliyah's foresight, not knowing that this was all Aaliyah's conclusion from analyzing information from her previous life. As she thought about it, Yas's face appeared in her mind, and Aaliyah's face instantly reddened again. The next evening, Aaliyah took a carriage to meet Sarah. She had sent a letter inviting Aaliyah to meet with her and the Marquis. Aaliyah opened the door, and was greeted by the Marquis. Sarah also rushed out, both surprised and delighted to see Aaliyah. So the three of them went inside to dine together. Aaliyah expressed gratitude for their invitation, and the Marquis felt it was only natural. Sarah spoke of the happy time spent with Aaliyah, a smile of happiness on her face. She felt truly happy to have found a kindred spirit. Aaliyah was somewhat surprised, although she constantly numbed herself, telling herself she was here for revenge in this life and Sarah was just being used. The happiness before her eyes was impossible to ignore. Aaliyah sincerely wished Sarah well in her heart. Aaliyah's birthday was approaching, but she didn't want to make a big fuss about it, because after that would be her sister Meal's birthday. The palace maid would come that day, and everyone would be busy with her arrival. Before that, there was no need for her to make her birthday party too conspicuous. Aaliyah's birthday passed simply, except for receiving that anonymously sent bouquet of tulips. Meal's birthday soon arrived, with many people coming and going. Aaliyah sat to the side, coldly watching the outwardly glamorous nobles, attacking her background with the most vicious words. Oscar and Meal entered the banquet together with the palace maid's mother, causing much discussion among the crowd. The palace maid stood at the front and said, "After Miss Meal comes of age, she will marry our Oscar." Aaliyah watched Oscar put the wedding ring on Meal's finger. Although she had approached Oscar just to isolate Meal, he had now become a discarded card. But if Oscar had firmly chosen her instead, Aaliyah could no longer bear it and ran out suddenly. Aaliyah ran to the window. What were her feelings for Oscar? Was she angry at not getting a usable card? Are there some things in this world that can't be obtained even with effort? A sense of loss and invisible walls surrounded Aaliyah. Aaliyah walked to her bedroom door and found a gift box containing the brooch she had given to Oscar. Aaliyah's anger reached its peak. That scumbag. I didn't do anything. Yet he gets engaged to Meal on one hand and sends back this brooch hinting at our past on the other. Am I supposed to understand even now? Aaliyah was about to throw the brooch to the ground when she saw that bouquet of bright, gentle tulips. Aaliyah was stunned. Why should she be angry over someone like this? She was different now from who she used to be. In this life, she had assets, faith, and power. Why should she deny her own efforts? There was still some time before Meal would show her power. If she did nothing, only death awaited her. She would never give up on life like she did in her previous life. At the dinner table, everyone was discussing Meal's engagement. Aaliyah wore the red rose brooch on her chest, showing it to Meal, saying she received the brooch at her door on the day of the engagement, as beautiful as the Duke's family crest. Meal realized the reason and was furious. Aaliyah smirked and disdainfully tossed the brooch aside. Meal was very upset about Aaliyah's brooch and planned to write to the palace maid, but was stopped by the servant. Previously, Meal had already written a long letter, asking the palace maid to announce the wedding date. Now, with the palace maid busy dealing with the internal strife of the nobility, the urgent matter was to find another way out. The maid suggested that they might as well win over the newly emerged bourgeois capitalists. So Meal began to hold tea parties one after another, and surprisingly, all the invited guests were commoner ladies. Arya sensed that something was not right and decided to investigate personally. Arya casually interrupted Meal's tea party, asking if she could join. Meal's face stiffened, and she was about to refuse. But the commoner ladies, unable to read the atmosphere, were instead very interested in Arya, the rumored villainess. Arya successfully entered the tea party, but unexpectedly discovered that the families of these invited ladies were all ones she had recently invested in. It seemed Meal also planned to win them over. The wealthy ladies discussed the wisdom of their investor, who had been of great help to them. Arya smiled awkwardly, feeling a bit embarrassed to hear others praise her like this. Arya used perfume to inquire about Mrs. Bost's work, and praised the lady's vision, winning a chorus of agreement from everyone. Meal was surprised. These ladies were actually working? Meal hinted that the ladies should hire long-term workers, but Arya coldly laughed and objected. What's wrong with the ladies lightening their husbands' burdens? Just as the two were about to argue, the ladies quickly tried to smooth things over. Although they agreed with Arya's point in their hearts, they still went along with Meal's words, saying they would definitely hire long-term workers in the future. But Meal's dislike for Arya reached its peak, and she didn't intend to end the conflict, but continued to state, dealing with dirty money is not a lady's style. This sentence offended both the ladies and Arya. To ease the atmosphere, Miel took out gifts of rose brooches. Arya inwardly sneered. Rose brooches are the symbol of the Duke's family. Yet her dear sister Miel, who hadn't even entered a wealthy family yet, was already thinking of throwing her weight around. The commoner ladies felt the gifts were too valuable and politely refused to accept them. Miel proposed that she could host another tea party next time and introduce the ladies to some of her friends. But the ladies hastily declined, saying that the Duke's family was too high for them to associate with. Miel left angrily. Arya smiled slightly and took the opportunity to suggest hosting a tea party herself. But the ladies hesitated. Arya felt a bit disappointed. But just then, the ladies suddenly invited Arya to attend their gathering. That day, Lien proudly presented Bost's invitation to Yas. Yas was also very interested in this newly emerged capitalist and the investors behind them, deciding to go and investigate. As the conflict with the noble faction intensified daily, those despicable lackeys, unable to tolerate the crown prince's increasing suppression, actually petitioned to send the crown prince to the frontier. Even Yas's father hurriedly summoned him back. However, Yas smiled slightly, with no intention of letting them off. Starting from the casino negotiation meeting, Yas no longer concealed his methods. These growing vermin needed to be eliminated one by one. Lien praised. Miss Arya is indeed clever. Her suggestion to give the casino to the nobles was so wise. Yas also fantasized about that blonde girl, his face slowly turning red, and he joined Lien in praising her. It must be said, the power of love is truly great, isn't it? It always makes people become sincere and frank. Lien suggested using Yas's teleportation skill to see Miss Arya, but Yas refused. Although he missed Arya very much, teleportation was very draining. However, it was because of this longing that work became more motivating. I hope we can meet soon. Beautiful Miss Arya. Yas began to work seriously, deciding to agree to lower luxury goods prices and hand over the letter to the neutral faction. However, this wasn't bowing to the noble faction, but a strategic retreat, as a sudden price drop would disrupt market order. Upon seeing the letter, the neutral faction couldn't help but sigh about the crown prince's uncertain future. Arya, far away in the capital, also heard about the crown prince's recent actions. With many nobles going bankrupt and casinos being investigated, Arya imagined the impact on the Robert family after the nobles' bankruptcy, and herself ending up on the streets, her little face turning red. That would be so wonderful. Arya came back to her senses, looking at the maid Barry kneeling before her, her eyes lowered. With such slow movements, she might only get to drink the brewed tea next year, right? Barry trembled at the question. Arya threw Mercy on the ground, smiling as she told Barry to clean up quickly. As the maid came to serve the meal, Arya thought about how this maid had played her in her previous life, once again marveling at how adorably naive she had been in her past life. Arya smiled slightly, ordering Barry to drink all of the master's tea. Barry's face turned quite unpleasant, but Arya was gleefully schadenfreude. I don't know whether to call it lucky or unlucky. My first revenge target. Dear little Barry, if you could have a superpower, which one would you choose? All along, Arya had thought that only she possessed the ability to turn back time with the hourglass, until she met this man. At the Rost family's dining table, everyone was enthusiastically discussing the neutral faction's behavior, but Arya was speculating about Yas's true identity because of this, wondering if he could be the Emperor's illegitimate son. Baron Rost asked Arya for her insights on the neutral faction, but Arya had no intention of helping him, feigning ignorance, which led to her sister Miel making some sarcastic remarks. Soon came the gathering of the new capitalists, to which Arya was invited, and at the same time, Yas also attended the gathering under the identity of Pinot. The two met like this at the meeting. Arya was shocked, not expecting Yas's true identity to be Pinot. But where did you get so much money? Arya glared at Yas, who unexpectedly averted his eyes, leaving Arya speechless and angry. Yas was equally embarrassed, but both were secretly stealing glances at each other. Observing the recent changes in each other, Arya gracefully introduced herself to everyone, and her unique insights from the last tea party won unanimous praise from everyone. Yas watched Arya looking at other men, his heart overflowing with jealousy. Then Yas smiled slightly and, as the new investor this time, began to introduce the investment project. Surprisingly, It was a school, and the unique feature of the school was that everyone, including commoners, could attend. Alia was slightly stunned. Although it seemed like an investment, Yas's behavior was providing opportunities for commoners. Could it be because she had shown him hope? Alia was secretly pleased, but Yas interrupted her, saying it wasn't because the empire needed talent. Alia's expression became awkward, realizing she had misunderstood. After the meeting, Alia didn't plan to pay attention to Yas, but he came over like a big puppy to greet her. As they walked, Alia felt a bit dejected, realizing she had discovered Yas was Prince Pinoru in such a setting. Yas denied this identity, confusing Alia. Why hide himself repeatedly? Could he really be an illegitimate child? Then Yas led Alia to a forest, claiming it was next to the capital. Alia was furious at this point. Still lying to me? How could we have walked so many kilometers in such a short time? This man clearly liked her, but not only did he not say it, he kept lying to her. It was infuriating. Alia's eyes dimmed. Yas brought her into a blue cabin and began to seriously explain his family's special ability, which was adaptation. Because Alia possessed the hourglass of time, she quickly understood. Then Yas said that Pinoru was just an alias, and his real identity was Astrophy, the crown prince. What? The crown prince? Alia was stunned, feeling both embarrassed and angry, a clear sense of dizziness coming over her. Her romantic interest turned out to be the crown prince. Yas looked at Alia somewhat helplessly, hoping she could treat him as before. But for Alia, this was clearly difficult. After all, the person before her was the crown prince, and she had been so disrespectful before. Yas then comforted Alia, saying he didn't mind her behavior and actually found her full of charm. Alia immediately felt shy. Yas looked at her, thinking she was as cute as a bristling kitten. Due to urgent matters, Yas could only place a kiss on the back of Alia's hand and say he would come again later. Alia returned home, stroking her arm, feeling both sweet and dazed. Not long after, Yas's project proposal arrived. Alia wouldn't miss this connection with the royal family and quickly signed the project document. But she worried about how to tell Yas that she was an investor. At the Rosette family's harmonious dinner, her mother mentioned Sarah and the Marquise's engagement, boasting about her daughter's good relationship with Sarah. Neil was very surprised, and father, Baron Rosette, hurriedly began to flatter Alia, but Alia ignored him completely, instead feeling angry at her father's sycophancy. At this time, she received a letter from Yas. Although it was just a simple greeting, Alia's mood inexplicably improved. Perhaps this was the power of love. Soon came Sarah's engagement party. Alia specially wore Sarah's best friend style dress, dressing up beautifully, dazzling Neil with her beauty. Alia gave her carefully prepared gift to Sarah. The sisters, not having seen each other for a long time, hugged happily. Neil inappropriately interrupted, introducing himself to Sarah and taking the opportunity to mock Alia. Hearing her good friend being spoken of like this, Sarah's eyes could kill, and she was also secretly worried about Alia's situation. The Marquis noticed his wife's unusual behavior and came to comfort her. Sarah shyly looked at him, sincerely hoping that Alia could find a good man like herself. Alia followed her father, standing in the banquet, becoming the center of attention. However, Alia's heart wasn't very happy, feeling as if in a different world. Listening to everyone's praise, she felt both nostalgic and repulsed, conflicting emotions filling her entire body. At this moment, Yas's sudden appearance interrupted Alia's thoughts. Alia hurriedly chased after him. The night was very dark, and Alia couldn't find Yas's figure. Just as she was feeling disappointed, a warm coat was draped over her shoulders. Alia looked at the coat Yas had put on her, her face turning red. The two exchanged sweet words in the courtyard. Alia hoped Yas could look at her openly, but Yas had come this time to win over the Marquis. Yet he couldn't control his longing heart, and to avoid directly facing the noble faction, he could only observe Alia from afar. The moonlight fell on Alia's golden hair, and Yas was momentarily dazed. Thinking Alia looked like an illusion, Yas placed a kiss on Alia's forehead, ending their brief meeting. At this moment, a shrill cry appeared. It turned out that a court lady who had been observing in secret had discovered their intimate behavior, angrily rebuking Alia and Yas for their impropriety. However, Yas was not interested in this nominal fiancée, especially since he had never intended to marry her from the bottom of his heart. So he sarcastically remarked to the court lady that he would rather remain single for life than marry her. This infuriated the court lady. Yas just smiled slightly, and casually threatened her with the casino ledger. After the party, the court lady returned home, getting angrier the more she thought about it. The crown prince certainly couldn't be touched, so that little seductress Alia must be eliminated. Just as the court lady was at a loss, Meal paid a visit, and she took the opportunity to propose dealing with Alia. Meal had been eager for this internally, and he had been giving Alia a hard time at home. Now with the court lady's support, malicious thoughts suddenly emerged. On the other side, Alia sat on the sofa, noticing Barry's behavior was a bit suspicious. At this moment, Annie happily ran in with a letter from Pinoru. Alia thought of Yas's situation, which was exactly like her previous life. Perhaps heaven had its own arrangements, putting two people with special abilities together. Could this change their fate? Annie was very happy that the young lady had so many suitors since the banquet, but the dazed Barry didn't pour tea for Annie, annoying her. Aaliyah, with a testing heart, asked Annie to drink her tea. Annie picked up the cup and took a sip, but Barry suddenly knocked it over. Annie immediately started cursing, then suddenly turned pale and collapsed. Aaliyah rushed to Barry, grabbing his hair. The death of her mother in her past life flashed before her eyes. With the same symptoms as Annie, this Barry was also the murderer who killed her mother. The hourglass of time slowly began to turn in Aaliyah's hand, rewinding to before Annie drank the tea. This time, however, Aaliyah herself picked up the poisoned cup of tea. After taking a sip, under Barry's smug and dark gaze, she fell to the ground. The maid who poisoned her fled out of fear of punishment, successfully confirming the rumors of poisoning the young lady. Aaliyah, prepared in advance, soon woke up. Meal, seemingly anxious, hurriedly came over. Aaliyah took the opportunity to act like a good sister, hinting that Barry was sent by Meal, and if he hadn't been sent, it would have been her dear sister in trouble today. Seeing Aaliyah's fragile appearance, everyone's sympathy soared. The news spread quickly, but it was only about a maid attempting to assassinate the young lady. Aaliyah felt this wasn't enough and instructed Annie to spread it further. Soon after, Sarah, hearing the news, rushed over. Aaliyah, pretending to be ill, deliberately caused kidney stones, appearing even more fragile and helpless in the eyes of her good friend Sarah. Sarah held Aaliyah's hand, telling her she would always believe in her. Aaliyah was also moved by the sincere emotion, genuinely thanking Sarah. Due to Annie's deliberate spreading, the incident was linked to someone deliberately instructing you, with Meal's maid Emma being the prime suspect. Aaliyah was very satisfied with how things were going. Even the knight who came to visit and investigate the case was moved by Aaliyah's feigned fragility. Aaliyah hinted to the knight that he could inquire with Meal. After all, this sister was closest to Emma. After the knight left, Aaliyah sat by the window, looking at the blooming tulips, telling Annie that they didn't need to change fresh flowers so often in winter. Annie found it strange, as the tulips were delivered daily in Aaliyah's name. Aaliyah immediately thought of Yas, a sweet blush coloring her face. At this moment, an unexpected guest arrived. It was her half-brother, Kane. However, Kane's behavior was very strange. Although he was concerned about Aaliyah, his gaze was very ambiguous, leaving Aaliyah puzzled. At the harmonious dinner table of the Rost family, everyone discussed Aaliyah's assassination attempt, expressing their concern. However, Kane, because of Aaliyah's incident, had made a big fuss, sending many people to investigate. Aaliyah realized the reason and felt instantly nauseated. Like father, like son indeed. Just as the Earl had grown tired of his original wife and had an affair, Kane had developed such thoughts about his own sister. But Aaliyah quickly calmed down, thinking this might not be so bad. If she could get Kane on her side and have him destroy the Rost family with his own hands, it would be extremely interesting. This woman is too vicious, willing to make her personal maid take the blame to cover up the truth of the matter. The truth can't be hidden forever. Because of Barry, Meal hurriedly found the palace maid, but the maid proposed that Emma should take the blame, leaving Meal in a dilemma. On the other side, Aaliyah learned of Meal's news. The palace maid meeting Meal while in such a frantic state surely meant they were both suspicious in the assassination attempt. Meanwhile, Brother Kane's infatuation with Aaliyah only grew. To create opportunities to spend time with Aaliyah, he would even personally pick up and return clothes she had dropped. Although Aaliyah was disgusted and sighed, she decided to make good use of Kane. Aaliyah invited Kane for tea, stating she would leave the mansion after coming of age. As expected, Kane became excited immediately. Aaliyah seized the opportunity to act fragile and show great trust in Kane. Kane, unable to contain himself, immediately ordered more people to investigate the assassination case. Aaliyah recalled her good brother's actions in her past life, comparing them to his current naive behavior, feeling both amused and angry. At night, Aaliyah was handling investment matters in the study. For some reason, Even foreign investors had sent invitations, hoping to join Aaliyah's investments. In addition to dealing with the assassination, Aaliyah hadn't slept well for days. Moonlight shone through the window onto the desk. Aaliyah slowly walked to the window and unexpectedly saw the person she had been longing for, Crown Prince Yas. Seeing Aaliyah, Yas immediately jumped onto the windowsill and handed her the tulip he was holding. Aaliyah, however, was very flustered, worried about what would happen if someone discovered them. Yas expressed his longing and felt guilty for not being able to appear openly by Aaliyah's side, stating that if Aaliyah was willing, he could accompany her at all times in his capacity as Crown Prince. Aaliyah, however, retreated, as her heart was wavering. The identity of Crown Prince had always made Aaliyah afraid to face it directly, even causing her to feel inferior. Yas, however, hoped Aaliyah could face her own heart honestly, and took out a letter containing Barry's address. Tiaz had already imprisoned Barry, and now Yas was handing over this assassination suspect to Aaliyah for her personal disposal. Aaliyah, however, asked Yas in return, what if she became very cruel to those who had hurt her? Yas looked at Aaliyah affectionately, saying he would believe in her no matter what choice she made. Aaliyah was deeply moved by Yas's words. That day, a mysterious person, wrapped up tightly, found Aaliyah. After removing the hood, it turned out to be Barry. It turned out that several days ago, Aaliyah had found Barry using the address Yas gave her. At that time, Barry, due to days of physical and mental torture, was already haggard beyond recognition. Aaliyah's heart didn't waver at all. She grabbed Barry's hair and told her that she had long known who was behind it all. Aaliyah had initially wanted to beat this murderer, but seeing her disgusting state, she withdrew her hand in disgust. Aaliyah calmed herself and made a deal with Barry. As long as Barry could reveal the mastermind, she would let her go abroad. Barry was terrified and confused, not believing Aaliyah's words. Aaliyah sneered disdainfully. Barry is now like a rat crossing the street. What other choice does she have besides agreeing to the proposal? In Count Rost's mansion, the maid Annie watched her mistress's actions over the past few days with confusion. Preparing a carriage and dried food. Was she planning to travel? But the carriage was very old. Aaliyah said she was sending someone on a one-way trip. Annie was quite puzzled. Barry arrived as promised, seeking Aaliyah's protection. Aaliyah demanded that Barry expose the mastermind publicly in the hall, but Barry was still hesitant. Aaliyah showed Barry the carriage, saying that as long as she told the truth, she could flee immediately after the deed was done. Then, to soothe Barry's nerves, Aaliyah deliberately put on a sweet and gentle facade, praising Barry's intelligence, saying she had just made the wrong choice and suffered unjust accusations. After days of mental torment, Barry was already exhausted. Now, being comforted by Aaliyah in this way, she predictably fell for it quickly. When people saw Barry appear, they were terrified. Neil strongly demanded that Barry be arrested immediately, but Barry said there was a real mastermind behind it. Aaliyah seized the opportunity to let everyone release her. Barry spoke about her inner struggle to poison Aaliyah. Aaliyah played along, pretending to understand Barry. Everyone began to pity Barry. Then, Barry revealed that the real culprit who gave her the poison was Emma. The scene became chaotic, with everyone discussing heatedly. Emma couldn't help but rush to Barry, grabbing her collar and cursing loudly. Neil's expression was extremely frightened. Aaliyah watched silently from the side, her smile impossible to hide even with her hand, her body trembling with immense joy. Her good brother Kane actually thought his sister was scared, and hurriedly embraced Aaliyah, comforting her softly. Although Aaliyah despised this in her heart, she still put on a weak facade. To solidify Emma's suspicion, Barry even revealed the poison she had hidden, saying the buyer could be traced. Even Aaliyah had to admire her meticulous thinking. Aaliyah pleaded for Barry, creating a kind young lady image for herself. Afterwards, she fulfilled her promise and sent Barry off in the carriage, reminding Barry to always remember the beautiful and kind Miss Aaliyah. Would she really easily let go of someone who had hurt her? Soon after, Annie complained that Barry really had the nerve to come back, but Aaliyah smiled slightly, because the content of the letter was that Barry had been dealt with. Emma's trial soon arrived. Although the outcome was already decided, Aaliyah still decided to attend in person. In the courtroom, Emma knelt on the ground without saying a word. Due to the severity of the crime, unless Aaliyah personally pleaded for Emma, Emma would not receive a lighter sentence. People discussed among themselves, feeling that this Miss Aaliyah was very different from the rumors, and that her kind-hearted nature should forgive Emma. However, Aaliyah firmly refused. Kindness invites bullying. With the judge's final gavel, Emma was sentenced to hanging. Mia finally couldn't bear it and collapsed in her seat. Aaliyah approached Meal, seemingly to comfort her, but smiled and told Meal that she had known all along who was behind it. Aaliyah looked at Meal's terrified expression, thinking that her good sister, even if raised by a mother like personal maid, still had to maintain her image, not saying a word. How cold-hearted indeed. At this moment, Lane suddenly stood up from his seat, offering to take Meal to the hospital, and secretly slipped a note to Aaliyah. Aaliyah followed the address out, with Taein secretly following her all the way. Aaliyah was inwardly exasperated, but could only put on a gentle facade and talk to Kane. Just then, Yas approached Aaliyah from behind and whispered in her ear, making the situation awkward. Aaliyah had to send Kane away, telling him that Yas was young Master Pinoru. Kane was successfully sent away, but Yas became jealous, immediately confessing his feelings to Aaliyah, saying he would believe in her no matter what, and apologizing for his previous rude behavior. When Aaliyah returned home, she was secretly delighted, finding Yas's jealousy adorable. However, Meal wasn't faring so well on the other side. Emma's death even made her ignore other women. The maids were uncomfortable with Meal's prejudice. Aaliyah seized this opportunity to win hearts, comforting the maids and giving them gifts, gaining a large number of fans. But Aaliyah felt it wasn't enough to strike at Meal. After all, Meal still had a fiancé. But now that she had Yas, it was the first time she wanted to be serious about someone. The letter from the Crown Prince was intercepted by Kane, but fortunately, the clever little maid managed to deflect suspicion. Aaliyah was calculating in her mind, planning to reveal her identity as an investor, and use Yas to raise her status in front of others. But the thought of using someone she loved made Aaliyah uncomfortable. Was Meal finally about to lose control because of Emma's matter? After returning home, Aaliyah tried hard to explain that she and Yas were just friends, and even fabricated Pinoru's identity for Yas, but Taein kept chattering, refusing to believe. Father even decided to find a fiancé for Aaliyah, giving Aaliyah a huge headache. Soon, the news that Aaliyah was looking for a fiancé spread like wildfire, with various young gentlemen sending cards to visit. Aaliyah looked gloomy. Fortunately, Kane intervened, though his intentions weren't entirely pure either. Lane came to visit, and by now Count Rost was frantic about finding a son-in-law, mistakenly thinking Lane had come to court Aaliyah, scaring Lane out of his wits. After all, he wouldn't dare steal the crown prince's wife. At the dinner table, Meal asked Father to help the palace maid, but Father refused. As the leader of the noble faction, the palace maid was being suppressed by the crown prince, and staying out of it was the best choice at this time. But Meal was unwilling. She was already engaged to Oscar. How could Father not help at all? Seeing Meal's agitated emotions, Aaliyah casually suggested that Meal shouldn't pressure Father, finally angering Meal enough to shout at her. Aaliyah smirked triumphantly, then suddenly became dramatic, crying and whimpering, successfully winning everyone's comfort. Meal, furious, went to find Oscar. Oscar could only offer some words of consolation, explaining that it was understandable for the Duke not to intervene, and that his sister Isis had another plan. In front of her fiancé, Meal reverted to her gentle and kind demeanor. Oscar, however, was struggling internally, based on his understanding of his sister, and his fiancé's constant communication with her recently. It was very likely that poisoning Aaliyah was their joint plan. But although Oscar secretly liked Aaliyah, he couldn't do anything because his actions affected the survival of the Duke's household. At night, the Rost family mansion was brightly lit, with numerous corrupt nobles gathered together. Aaliyah, curious, wanted to come out to gather information, but around the corner, she bumped into Kane again. Aaliyah offered to help her father, but Kane hesitated and actually told Aaliyah to learn foreign languages. Aaliyah was immediately confused. The next day, Sarah rushed anxiously to Aaliyah's room, telling her that the court lady was going to marry a foreign king. Aaliyah instantly understood that the court lady was planning to openly declare war on the crown prince. Sarah and Aaliyah discussed not getting involved in the war, and decided to pack their bags and leave. What's it like to receive a ring from the crown prince? Could he be proposing to her? Because the court lady planned to openly declare war on the crown prince, Aaliyah's mother planned to go abroad and advised Aaliyah not to worry about feelings. But Aaliyah hesitated. Rather than leaving, she had more important things to do. Aaliyah wanted her mother to go to safety first. Her mother stepped forward and gently embraced Aaliyah, saying she would always be with her, and would have everything packed ready to leave whenever she wanted. Aaliyah smiled at her mother, and it was precisely because of this strong support that she had more reason to move forward. Aaliyah decided to attend the school's completion ceremony as an investor and sent invitations to the Rost family. As expected, she was mocked by Meal. Her mother was also surprised, not understanding why Aaliyah would involve herself in discussions related to the crown prince in such a situation. But Aaliyah smiled slightly, her mind made up. The next day, Aaliyah dressed up beautifully, wearing an elegant dress with rose patterns. Her mother was still worried and helped Aaliyah ask the count for permission to go out. Everyone set off in grand style. Looking at this magnificent and grand building, Aaliyah smiled awkwardly, joking that Yas was showing off his crown prince's prestige. Aaliyah's group met the Marquise's family at the entrance, and the two best friends hugged affectionately. Aaliyah made no effort to hide her cooperation with the Marquis in front of everyone, scaring the Marquis quite a bit. After a round of mutual flattery, everyone took their seats, Aaliyah's gaze searching everywhere for Yas. Suddenly, Yas, wearing a white royal ceremonial robe, made a dazzling entrance in front of everyone. Yas's eyes met Aaliyah's, and he thought sweetly to himself, "My wife must have come to see me." Yas took the stage, announcing to everyone that he was the crown prince, and stated that the school would provide education for commoners. Everyone discussed among themselves, and the onlookers around Aaliyah seemed to realize something was off. What was with the inexplicable tulip aura around Yas? After Yas finished his speech, he immediately invited the behind-the-scenes investor to the stage. Aaliyah lifted her skirt, curtsied slightly to Yas, wanting to reintroduce herself as an investor. Yas was stunned for a moment, then smiled gently. This young lady always manages to create surprises. Aaliyah stood on the stage giving her speech, her beautiful and confident appearance winning over a large group of admirers. After the speech, having been apart for so long, Aaliyah missed Yas and wanted to know his reaction to knowing the truth. But Yas was pulled away by a man in black and didn't return until the ceremony ended. Everyone discussed Aaliyah's beauty and the rumors. Just as Aaliyah was disappointedly thinking that Yas wouldn't appear again, Yas gently wrapped his arm around Aaliyah's shoulders from behind. This man publicly stated that he had an appointment with this beautiful lady. Afterwards, Yas and Aaliyah came to the secret cottage. Aaliyah was a bit nervous, constantly staring at her teacup. The interior decor had been completely renovated, and Yas said he had specially redecorated it to match Aaliyah's temperament. Yas's attempts to please made Aaliyah feel particularly accurate today. Then they discussed the issue of concealing identities, and Aaliyah smiled, thinking Yas should empathize. After all, his Pinoru was also a fake identity. Yas expressed understanding but wanted to ask more questions. Aaliyah's heart was pounding, not knowing what Yas would ask. Unexpectedly, Yas only inquired about Aaliyah's recent situation, very concerned that Aaliyah hadn't been resting well. Considering she had to handle investment matters, Aaliyah said she was just handling letters, and that Yas must be busier. Before Aaliyah could finish speaking, Yas smugly leaned in to thank Aaliyah for worrying about him. Suddenly, Aaliyah felt both helpless and speechless. Yas hoped Aaliyah wouldn't worry about him, recalling his past, having to submit to the noble faction to survive, even having to marry the court lady, and because of bad childhood experiences. He had also been rude to Aaliyah in the casino incident. Aaliyah suddenly realized that Yas was apologizing to her. Yas hoped Aaliyah could understand his inner feelings. Aaliyah deeply empathized with that sense of being bound by fate and the determination not to give up. Just as Aaliyah was pondering, Yas gently took out a bouquet of tulips. Kneeling beside Aaliyah, "Beautiful Miss Aaliyah, let's date." Yas apologized for not having time to prepare more, having only a bouquet of flowers. Aaliyah smiled, finding Yas's confident puppy face very cute. Aaliyah shyly accepted the flowers, forgiving Yas's impulsiveness, hoping that next time, her little cutie Yas would be more ceremonial. Yas promised Aaliyah that when he proposes, the whole country will celebrate. On the other side, Meal sat in the carriage, finding it strange. There were too many people gathered around. The maid told her about Aaliyah's situation, and Meal hurried to see the court lady. At this moment, the court lady stood by the bed, grinding her teeth in anger. Damn Aaliyah. No wonder she was so arrogant and dared to give attitude. She had been involved with the crown prince all along. Aaliyah returned home, and her fickle father immediately came over to curry favor, inviting Aaliyah to have tea together. However, Aaliyah decided not to tolerate it anymore and said, it seems that she and her father had never had tea together before. The fickle count tried to ingratiate himself with his daughter, but Aaliyah indicated that she also had something to say. Under her fickle father's gaze, Aaliyah announced her relationship with her boyfriend and expressed her desire to bring him home for a visit. After saying this, she went upstairs with a smile, leaving behind a dumbfounded count and an instantly irritated Kane. Early the next morning, the count's mansion was packed to the brim. and even Aaliyah had many people offering their services during her breakfast break. To consolidate power, Aaliyah proactively offered to cover the tuition fees to send these people to study at the research institute. Looking at the people wolfing down food at the dining table, Aaliyah secretly sighed, remembering that in her previous life, she was just like them, with questionable table manners. Meanwhile, her father, Count Rost, instantly transformed into a sycophant, sticking close to Aaliyah during breakfast. He even asked Aaliyah if she would go with Cain to discuss business in the future. Aaliyah smiled and declined her dear father's request, saying she had to handle investment matters. But sycophants are always persistent, and her father knowingly asked if Aaliyah was an investor. Aaliyah was exasperated by her management situation. Tyne then shifted the topic to the crown prince. Aaliyah recounted her past with her boyfriend, saying they had known each other for 2 years, and Yas had always been disguised as Pinoru. Their romantic love story piqued her mother's curiosity. Aaliyah shyly said she couldn't say more, wanting to leave some suspense for everyone until Yas came to describe it himself. Tyne's face instantly clouded over. The maid Jessie reported that Aaliyah had finished processing the visitor list, then brought the newspaper about Hans, sweetly telling Aaliyah that Hans had also been admitted to the research institute. Aaliyah recalled the past moments, realizing she hadn't expected such big changes in 2 years. Camille and Axis were like thorns stuck in her throat, but now she was no longer afraid of them, instead feeling excited about future conflicts. However, the palace maid on the other side was not idle either. Meal was desperately trying to say nice things, telling the palace maid that the crown prince had never appeared in the mansion, and that the two of them must be just rumors. The palace maid calmly drank her tea, stating that the two of them absolutely could not marry, otherwise it would be an insult to the nobility. The palace maid decided to move up Meal and Oscar's wedding. Meal's face instantly lit up with excitement. At night, Jessie once again sweetly talked about Hans. Aaliyah, looking at the happy Jessie, remembered that in her previous life, Jessie was also loyal to her, but she couldn't understand why Jessie fell for that poor boy Hans. Aaliyah reluctantly decided to personally train Hans. Aaliyah picked up the envelope Yas had sent on the side table. In the letter, Yas had set a meeting time and sent a bracelet. That night, the couple met again under the gentle moonlight. The lovers met under the gentle moonlight. Aaliyah looked at Yas, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, and felt he had gotten a bit darker. Yas, feeling a bit embarrassed under Aaliyah's gaze, told her he had been to a tropical region. The two sat together drinking tea. Yas noticed that Aaliyah was still wearing the ring he had given her, which made him very happy inside. Aaliyah also noticed that Yas was wearing a ring that looked very similar to a couple's ring, except for the color. Yas took off the ring, and it actually changed color. Aaliyah was stunned. Yas then explained that this ring was a royal family heirloom, and it would change color whenever he used his ability. Aaliyah's hands trembled for a moment. She hadn't realized the ring was so valuable. Yas gently held Aaliyah's hand and said, "Only Aaliyah is worthy of this ring." Aaliyah's face instantly turned red with embarrassment. After a moment of sweetness, Aaliyah discussed business with Yas. Sarah wanted to come to the research institute as an etiquette teacher. Thinking of the neutral marquee behind Sarah, the couple had a cunning look on their faces. Yas wanted Aaliyah to meet the judge, but Aaliyah didn't want to meet unfamiliar people. A few days later, Yas sent a royal envelope to the count's mansion, and the mansion bustled with activity. Meal was very unhappy, mocking Aaliyah for being presumptuous and fantasizing about becoming the crown princess. Aaliyah didn't back down at all. Fortunes can change, and she was certainly better than Meal and some traders. This instantly left Meal speechless with anger. On this day, Yas arrived at the count's mansion in a luxurious carriage. Aaliyah's family stood at the door to welcome him. The couple shamelessly displayed their affection. Even the guards were exasperated, reminding Yas to pay attention. Count Rost was dazzled by Yas. Everyone dined outdoors. Although Cain and Meal were displeased, they couldn't show it. Aaliyah was secretly delighted. Yas and Count Rost talked about business, with Rost fawning over Aaliyah. However, Aaliyah redirected the topic to Meal, praising her on the surface but actually being sarcastic. Tyne interjected to ask about Yas's purpose for coming. Yas sought permission from the count and his wife, expressing his sincere intentions. After the meal, Aaliyah suggested showing Yas the garden her mother had renovated. The young couple excused themselves under everyone's gaze. Meal watched Aaliyah and the crown prince's retreating figures, inwardly screaming. Yas and Aaliyah strolled around the house. Although the count's mansion mansion wasn't as big as the palace. Yas looked at everything carefully because this was where Aaliyah had lived. Aaliyah recalled her past and present lives, experiencing many things in this familiar yet strange place. She couldn't help but feel emotional. What was it like to bring the crown prince to meet her parents? The crown prince asked Aaliyah if he hadn't done well enough meeting her parents for the first time. Aaliyah said that his status as crown prince had already made her parents very happy. Yas then turned around with a pitiful puppy-like expression, and Aaliyah immediately realized that this childish person was seeking praise. That day, on Yas's introduction, Aaliyah received a letter from Judge Prey inviting her to meet, though she was still puzzled about the judge's intentions. Prey, however, seemed exceptionally enthusiastic, preparing elaborate refreshments for Aaliyah, and inquiring about all of Aaliyah's preferences, leaving her bewildered. Soon, Prey brought out a piece of clothing for Aaliyah to try on. At first, Aaliyah thought Prey was treating her like his own daughter, but that outfit turned out to be men's clothing. Prey became even more excited when Aaliyah put it on, and asked if Aaliyah's mother had said anything. Aaliyah felt a bit embarrassed and said she had something to do, and took her leave. At the Rost family's dining table, Kane strongly opposed Aaliyah's marriage, but was firmly interrupted by Earl Rost. However, Meal told her brother to be patient, secretly telling Kane that she had a plan, because she had been on high alert to meet Prey earlier. Aaliyah was now physically and mentally exhausted, and had forgotten about her agreement to meet Yas tonight. Yas immediately turned into a sad, dejected big puppy, and Aaliyah quickly explained that she wasn't feeling herself. Aaliyah and Yas talked about Prey, and Yas seemed to understand something. Prey had a brother who was kicked out of the family and looked very similar to Aaliyah. Yas said he had seen his portrait when he was young, and they both had blonde hair. Then, Yas sent the workaholic Ryan to find the portrait for his wife. Annie came in from outside and was startled to see the crown prince in Aaliyah's room. Aaliyah quickly explained that Yas had climbed in through the window. Annie reported that Aaliyah, Meal seemed to be up to something again. However, now that the entire Earl's household was under Aaliyah's control, although it would be easy to kill Meal, wouldn't it be more interesting to wait for Meal to make a mistake on her own? It was time for the Research Institute to award scholarships, and Aaliyah had to go out. Meal, however, dressed up and blocked Aaliyah's way, asking if Aaliyah would be coming back today. Aaliyah answered her irritably. The sycophantic ladies around Meal all criticized Aaliyah for being unworthy and daring to be so rude, but Meal's expression suddenly turned terrifying, and she asked Aaliyah again, "Are you really not coming back?" This villainess stopped the protagonist Aaliyah and asked if she would be coming home today. Aaliyah was very annoyed, not knowing what Meal was up to again. Aaliyah and Annie arrived at the Research Institute. Annie saw her little lover Baron Bowden, and the two had a sweet moment together. Sarah also came alone and handed Aaliyah the envelope for the same position. Aaliyah felt embarrassed because this would put the Marquis in a difficult position. However, her good friend Sarah fully supported Aaliyah, saying that the neutral faction had already approached the Marquis, and now they must choose sides, and she would do her best to persuade her husband. Aaliyah was instantly touched, and the two good friends hugged excitedly. Aaliyah stood at the podium announcing the list of winners, and Hans looked surprised when his name was called. She looked at Jess's happy and excited expression, sincerely hoping she could be happy. Annie also had a brooch custom made for Aaliyah and pinned it on her academy uniform, showing the team's loyalty to Aaliyah. Jessie also wanted one, but Annie hurriedly refused. Aaliyah immediately realized that this little girl was selling badges and making a fortune. At night, Aaliyah returned home, but strangely, Meal was still hosting a party. The noble ladies saw Aaliyah and teased her about wearing a bracelet they had never seen before, saying it was something only found in the slums. Annie made a face and told them, "It's from the crown prince." Meal's unusual behavior made Aaliyah feel uneasy. Aaliyah returned to her room, and Meal suddenly knocked on her door. Aaliyah was very uncomfortable and said she was changing clothes, not opening the door for Meal. However, Meal insisted on staying outside, and Aaliyah reluctantly opened the door. Meal said, "Father wants to talk to us." Earl Rost puzzledly asked his daughter, "What do you want to do?" Meal slowly turned her head, looking at her father with a dark expression. In Rost and Aaliyah's panicked gaze, Rost was pushed by Meal and rolled down the stairs. Because he tried to grab Aaliyah's hand, the bracelet was torn off. Meal suddenly shouted, "Aaliyah!" pushed father down. Aaliyah was shocked, thinking Meal must have gone mad. Yas rushed in through the window, hugging Aaliyah, glaring fiercely at Meal. People heard the noise and hurried over, and the scene became very chaotic. Aaliyah suddenly woke up from her dream, and Yas sat by the bed telling her, "This is a forest cabin. You had already fainted when I brought you out. Alia hurriedly looked for her hourglass, wanting to turn back time to before the incident happened. The pocket watch on her chest was gone. As Alia was anxious, she suddenly thought, can time really be reversed? This villainess was ruthless, pushing her own father down the stairs and framing her sister. Alia, rescued by the crown prince, calmed down and realized that even if she used the hourglass to reverse time now, although she could stay in the cabin, Arthur couldn't. Moreover, her bracelet would still be left at the bottom of the stairs, and even if she didn't open the door for Meal would still push her father down the stairs and frame her. The moment Alia responded, she had already fallen into the trap. Alia then asked Arthur, "Why did you suddenly appear?" "Arthur, the broken bracelet has its own magic and can sense when Alia is in danger." Arthur felt guilty seeing Alia looking so troubled. Alia looked at her boyfriend who was so worried about her, and couldn't bring herself to complain. The two hugged tightly. After hearing Alia explain Meal's plan, Yas decided to help his wife through this difficult time by using travel to create an alibi, and have a little honeymoon at the same time. On the other side, the little green tea Meal put on an act of being pitiful, placing the blame on Alia. Although the servants didn't believe it, they couldn't stop the rumors. The doctor diagnosed that the Earl still had a pulse, and Meal immediately panicked. The Viscount at the border hurriedly received the news and rushed to meet the crown prince, only to see that the prince had brought a beautiful wife. The two decided to charge to their account due to the sudden trip, but the Viscount quickly offered to treat them. Alia smiled slightly, and she and Arthur exuded irresistible charm. How could true nobility ever engage in freeloading? Moreover, these credit bills and times will become excellent evidence to prove their innocence. At night, Alia, slightly tipsy after a small drink, strolled drunkenly through this absolute home, opening the door to find Yas sitting in the courtyard. Yas, seeing Alia's flushed little face, asked if she was sick. Alia gently rubbed Yas's hand, finding it cool and comfortable. Yas immediately became shy and told Alia to go back and rest early. Alia deliberately asked with some confusion, "Aren't you here?" Hearing Alia's words, Yas suppressed the restlessness in his heart. Alia, looking at Yas's reaction, found her extremely adorable. Under the soft moonlight, the two started chatting. Yas had just received news from the capital. Alia had already been reported to the guard, and now she needed to quickly leave the border and create more alibis. Alia was surprised that Yas could use his ability so frequently, and was very concerned about Yas's condition. Yas, however, said he was fine. It was just short distance movement. Yas told Alia to rest early, but the adorable Alia leaned on the crown prince. The corners of the crown prince's mouth immediately curved upwards slightly. This young couple went out on a honeymoon to create alibis. The next day, Alia and the crown prince bid farewell to the Viscount, and just after they left, a wanted order came from the government, claiming Alia had killed the count's father last night. The Viscount was immediately confused, as the two were clearly like this. Yas in the carriage suddenly picked up Alia and flew into the sky. Alia was once again surprised that Yas used his ability. Yas extended his hand, inviting Alia for a walk, and the two held hands, enjoying their hard-earned leisure time. Arriving at the market, Yas bought 2 black cloaks. There was no choice. His wife was too beautiful and eye-catching. Alia excitedly called Yas to watch a magic show. Yas was momentarily dazed. The two played to their heart's content in the market. Yas asked Alia, "Didn't you dislike crowds before?" Alia recalled the past, when she was poor and disliked, except for an equally dirty little boy who invited her to be his companion. The little girl innocently asked the boy, "How many sausages can I eat?" Alia's expression gradually became lonely in her memories. Yas sensed her unease and spoke up to comfort her. Alia looked at Yas, very grateful that Yas invited her for a walk. Suddenly, a robbery occurred on the street, and a poor boy was injured while chasing after the thief. The crowd murmured, suggesting that this poor kid might be extorted. The angry Alia thought of her past self, twisted her vision, and the hourglass suddenly pushed the boy away. Yas hurriedly ran over due to Alia's strange behavior. The boy angrily shouted at Alia, and to appease him, Alia, besides using her beauty to seduce, also gave him a bracelet. The boy, having gotten a great deal, ran away quickly, fearing Alia might change her mind. Yas held Alia's hand, seeming to see a beam of light from the ring. Alia, however, said Arthur was too tired recently, brushing it off. Soon back in the guest room, Alia was about to fall into a deep sleep due to using her ability. She reminded Yas, if she doesn't wake up when he knocks, he can come in and wake her up. Alia gave Yas a flirtatious wink, making him immediately shy. The crown prince was planning to reclaim the throne, and received an investigation about Prey's brother from Lien. This man, very similar to Aaliyah, was named Chloe, originally raised by the royal family David and Valerie. He was accidentally discovered to be Valerie's illegitimate child. Chloe's biological father, Piet, remained very mysterious. Arthur, thinking of Prey's behavior, vaguely had a bold guess. The carriage was about to arrive, and Aaliyah indeed couldn't be woken up. Arthur shyly entered Aaliyah's room. Aaliyah was like Sleeping Beauty, and Arthur, thinking of their recent travels, gently stroked her hair. The golden hourglass, however, suddenly caught his attention. Arthur felt a strange familiarity, and at this moment, Aaliyah, who should have been asleep, looked at him with a gloomy face. Panicked, Aaliyah angrily looked at Yas, unsure if it was due to guilt over the hourglass's secret, or because Yas had touched her things without permission. They were about to reach the border of the Kruya kingdom, yet Yas felt Aaliyah was being cold towards him. Although Aaliyah had calmed down afterwards, Yas's excuse was poor, but he would absolutely not tamper with the hourglass. Aaliyah didn't blame Yas in her heart, she just hated her own subservient self. The crown prince, however, was dejected, wondering what to do now that his wife didn't want to talk to him. Soon they arrived at their destination, and as soon as they got off the carriage, they attracted attention for cutting in line. Viscounts came to ask Yas and Aaliyah for signatures, and the crowd buzzed with discussion again. Aaliyah became embarrassed upon hearing the praise. Yas was in full puppy mode again that night, claiming Aaliyah was very popular, and if he wasn't the crown prince, he would also be standing in the crowd watching. Aaliyah now had enough alibis, and the two decided to head back to the Empire tomorrow. Arthur invited Aaliyah for a candlelit dinner on their last leisurely night. Aaliyah waited alone in the room for Yas, when suddenly someone knocked on the door. The visitor had silver hair, called Arthur by name intimately, and seemed to know Aaliyah as well. After this brief interlude, Yas and Aaliyah had dinner together. Due to the issue with the silver-haired man, Aaliyah was distracted throughout. Yas introduced the dishes to Aaliyah, and suggested having a real vacation after everything was settled. Aaliyah lowered her head, indicating that she also wanted to have a truly comfortable trip with Yas. The conversation was suddenly interrupted by someone named Luhan, who scolded Yas for not prioritizing her, and mentioned that he had just gone to see Aaliyah. He then gracefully approached Aaliyah and gently greeted her, "Beautiful lady, seeing you in person is truly better than hearing about you." Luhan kept pestering Yas about his intentions. Yas, furious that this brat was interrupting his date, threatened him menacingly, then guessed that the two must be close friends. After being a third wheel for a while, Luhan left, but not before kissing Aaliyah's hand, infuriating the jealous Yas. Aaliyah, speechless and angry, rubbed her hand. Yas crouched down, gently kissed Aaliyah's hand, and promised that if this stinky kid behaved so rudely again, he would definitely kill him. Aaliyah looked at the gentlemanly Yas, her heart fluttering. This evil woman pushed her own father down the stairs, and then pretended to be in pain by his bedside. She's truly wicked. Tyne still didn't believe it was Aaliyah who pushed her father. Meal looked ominously at her naive brother. If Count Father dies, Sister Aaliyah and the family will be his. Meal complained about how disgusting her family was, while holding a letter from Oscar, fantasizing about her future good life. Kane also received a letter, instantly flying into a rage. The letter said, Aaliyah is in the kingdom of Kruya, on an intimate trip with the crown prince. Meal's expression was very evil, even wanting to drag the crown prince down with her. Yas and Aaliyah returned to the capital. As soon as they arrived, Meal activated her acting skills, tearfully blaming Aaliyah. Unexpectedly, Aaliyah didn't back down, immediately pretending innocently that she knew nothing about it. The two women put on a show, cursing each other in their hearts. Aaliyah continued her act, saying she thought it was just an excuse from her father to prevent her from continuing the trip with the crown prince, then threw herself into Arthur's arms. Yas also showed his boyfriend power, acting along with his wife. Meal couldn't continue the act, saying to Yas, "We have witnesses and evidence." Yas scoffed, "Then we'll see you in court." The little sycophant Kane, watching them being lovey-dovey, completely lost it. Soon everyone arrived at the court. Meal said she saw it with her own eyes and brought 2 little followers. People were discussing, but Aaliyah claimed she wasn't even at the scene at that time. Meal was furious, saying all her good friends saw it. Aaliyah looked gloomily at the wavering little followers, stating that she did return home, but didn't enter the mansion. Neil was very anxious. Aaliyah smiled slightly and submitted evidence. Arthur, as a witness, helped prove his wife indeed went on a trip and didn't bring money. Neil argued that the credit bill could have been used after killing and fleeing. The judge, after reviewing the evidence, found the timing on the bill made the crime impossible, so he had to adjourn for further judgment. Neil couldn't hold back her expression. Aaliyah gave her a look of royal contempt, not understanding where this little green tea got her courage. Neil, unwilling to give up this good opportunity, produced a broken bracelet. Aaliyah showed the new bracelet on her wrist, saying, "How could a broken bracelet be mine?" Neil, speaking recklessly in anger, claimed it was the crown prince's plan. Arthur, unrestrained for life, left Neil speechless. Aaliyah, however, truly realized that her sister was actually a fool. Aaliyah had no reason to harm her father. The onlookers, due to Aaliyah's accumulated reputation and the benefits needed by the count, began to turn against Neil. Aaliyah looked at these fickle people, just like herself in her previous life. The only difference being that Neil was a true villainess who could push her father down the stairs. This villainess was left speechless by the crown prince and doctor's unrestrained rebuttals, and people in the crowd had already started to doubt her. Neil turned back to look at her brother, only to find that Cain had turned his head away for fear of being seen as an accomplice. He truly inherited the fine bloodline of Count Rost. Neil, seeing that everyone was about to push her out, was furious. Even her little followers had turned against her. Neil spoke recklessly, even saying there was another eyewitness, the crown prince, who used magic to take her sister away. Aaliyah immediately said she thought Neil might have a mental illness. After all, they played very wildly that day. The party didn't end until very late. She might have used a displacement potion. The little followers also panicked, immediately denying it, saying they only saw a figure with long golden hair from behind, not Aaliyah. All eyes in the crowd were on Neil. Aaliyah's heart was overjoyed. The little green tea finally tasted what it's like to be wrongly accused. Neil broke down, shouting loudly, "It wasn't me. It was the crown prince who used magic." The judge announced a recess and criticized Miael's unrealistic statements. As soon as Aaliyah came out, she received concern from everyone. Her good friend Sarah even cried like rain. In contrast, Neil fell to the ground and no one even looked at her, just like Aaliyah in her previous life. But Neil brought this upon herself. Aaliyah returned home, and all the servants came to express their concern. Aaliyah went to her father's room, not knowing which side this man would stand on when he wakes up. If he insists with Neil that she is the culprit, her little head might not be safe again. On the day of the trial, Arthur came early to pick up Aaliyah, declaring his ownership. In the car, Yas looked at Aaliyah adoringly. Suddenly, Aaliyah pressed her hand tightly to her heart. Yas hurriedly asked, "What's wrong?" Aaliyah looked at Yas as if she had succeeded. "Every time I'm with you, my heart can't handle the butterflies." Yas immediately blushed. "What should I do when my wife is so good at flirting?" As soon as they arrived at the entrance, they saw the green tea villain. Neil didn't dare to glare at the crown prince. She could only timidly glare at Aaliyah. But Yas sensed his wife's displeasure and immediately hugged her waist. Aaliyah leaned against Yas, and Yas's puppy-like face turned red. Then the judge announced that Aaliyah was acquitted and released, while Neil was arrested and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Neil looked shocked, and Cain hurriedly requested to withdraw the lawsuit, but it was too late. Soon newspapers were spreading Neil's crimes everywhere. Aaliyah was also going home, but Yas was very worried about his wife. After all, there was still a simp like Cain. However, Aaliyah hadn't finished her revenge on Neil yet, and needed to go back to think about it. Yas, the little puppy, became dejected, hoping his wife would grow up soon so she could be with him every day. Aaliyah was very shy. Indeed, only those who don't love resort to schemes. True love always relies on sincerity. This young couple was showing their affection, making even the maid grin. On the other side, Cain couldn't believe that his sister Neil could be sentenced to 20 years. He applied for bail for Neil, but was mercilessly rejected by the judge. How could someone who killed their own father and bought fake documents be granted bail? Cain came to visit Neil, and the evil woman was actually locked in a small house. Cain thought that the crown prince must have given instructions in advance, as she didn't receive noble treatment. When Neil saw Cain come, she immediately blamed Aaliyah, and at this moment, she was still worried about Oscar canceling the engagement. At this point, Neil was almost losing it, and actually suggested that her brother provide false testimony, saying he saw Aaliyah push someone. As soon as Cain got home, he went to see Aaliyah, but his heart was very selfish, not wanting to help Neil get involved in trouble. Meal asked her brother to meet the palace maid Bizen's family, but they weren't present at the two trials. The palace maid didn't want to deal with it at all, just sent a letter and that was it. However, unexpectedly, Count Rost woke up. Hying, this filial son, thought that if the count could prove it was Aliyah who pushed him, wouldn't everything turn for the better? But due to an accident, the count couldn't speak, only blink. Just as Cain was about to ask his father to answer by blinking, Countess Rost rushed in. Cain looked displeased, and this stepmother happened to bump into Aliyah who had just arrived, shyly going to kiss the judge. Aliyah and her mother lay in the courtyard. Although the count had woken up, her mother wasn't happy. The count was paralyzed and couldn't speak, and Cain was eyeing her daughter covetously. Aliyah joked, "I thought you two were deeply in love." The mother then told the story of her and the count. The count's previous wife was too boring, and she herself didn't pose a threat to the family fortune. When the previous wife died, she was just a replacement, but at least she didn't have to eat bread. However, if Cain became the head of the family, that might not be the case. Aliyah asked her mother if she wanted to leave. Her mother said she needed to be fully prepared, and was still waiting to see Aliyah and Arthur's wedding. Aliyah held her mother's hand tightly. Because the count had woken up, Meal was sentenced to 5 years of home confinement, but she was still not satisfied. Wondering why her father didn't help her, the countess and Aliyah surrounded the count, showing concern. The count remembered being pushed down, Meal's hateful expression, and didn't even want to see her. Maybe the fall had knocked some sense into him. The count shed tears, finally understanding who truly cared for him. However, Cain, this filial son, didn't think so. Meal's case could be solved with money. Next was to get this old fool out of the way. Meal, confined in her room, shed tears, but showed no remorse. She walked to the bedside and took out her last trump card. This evil woman wrote a letter to the palace maid Isis, but the maid was completely dismissive, thinking Meal was both stupid and troublesome. On the other side, Aliyah was trying hard to build her image in front of her father, speaking well of Meal, indirectly making the count compare the two daughters. The foolish Cain eavesdropped at the door. Knowing his father would definitely not help Meal, Aliyah quickly ran to Cain, praising him profusely. The naive Cain couldn't resist and revealed everything about his preparations to inherit the family business. Aliyah, looking pitiful, suggested that Meal's behavior was strange, saying Meal might be on drugs. Cain was instantly captivated and proposed to thoroughly investigate the substitution agent. The two were caught red-handed by Yas, who arrived at the count's mansion. Yas proposed to investigate thoroughly in the name of the royal family. Meal banged on the door loudly from the crack. Yas opened the door with a lowered gaze, and Meal immediately shrank back in fear, but she couldn't struggle and was quickly forced out. Aliyah quietly commented that Meal still seemed quite energetic. Meal immediately couldn't help but curse at Aliyah. Aliyah calmly slapped her hard, stunning Arthur, who was about to stand up for his wife. People speculated that Meal's abnormal behavior might be due to drug use. Arthur, seeing his wife being cursed at, became more determined to handle this matter properly. Meal insisted she wasn't on drugs. Yas gently crouched down and asked if she had seen him suddenly disappear. Meal, clearly not skilled enough, still tried to make others believe her and repeated that she saw Yas using magic. Yas firmly concluded, this little green tea must be on drugs. Meal was devastated inside. Yas turned back with a slight smile. Even if the crown prince really had magic, would anyone believe it? Meal finally lost everyone's trust, but she wasn't willing to give up her chance to struggle. Meal had kept all the sexual innuendos with the palace maid. They were in the same boat. The palace maid had already killed this girl 1,000 times in her mind. Soon, the palace maid sent a maid, who switched places with Meal during mealtime. Meal, dressed as a maid, was about to walk out when suddenly stopped by a guard. Meal panicked, but the guard only asked if the meal delivery time had been moved up. Brother Cain came to see her off, not understanding why his sister insisted on leaving. However, since Meal had made this choice, he could only let her. As soon as Meal got in the carriage, she started chatting with the palace maid. The maid immediately asked if Meal had brought the letter. Meal said the thing was important, so she didn't bring it. The palace maid didn't expect this girl to be so cunning. Meal then mentioned that Yas could use magic. The palace maid was exasperated, thinking even if there really was magic, who would believe this foolish girl if she just said it outright? As the two villains were pulling against each other, the carriage slowly headed towards the kingdom of Kruya. This silver-haired handsome man, so young, yet already the ruler of a country. Meal and Isis quickly arrived at the kingdom of Kruya. Unexpectedly, the king who received them was a young, very handsome man. Meal hid behind, secretly observing. The young king smiled gently at him, and Meal instantly became infatuated. Luhan praised Meal's rare blonde hair and blue eyes, then inquired about Meal's court lady who had greeted him in advance. Meal could only say his name was El. Luhan showered him with more compliments. Meal fantasized, thinking perhaps this gentle king would help him. And right in the great hall, he requested to speak. The court lady beside him was speechless with anger. Back in the room, the court lady didn't know what this girl was up to, and asked Meal to write a letter of guarantee. But Meal was still daydreaming, wanting Luhan to help him. At this time, Luhan was swirling a glass of red wine, discussing usurpation with his attendant. Meal hesitated outside Luhan's door. Suddenly, the door opened, and Luhan, exuding a melancholic aura, invited Meal in. Seeing the gentle, handsome man, Meal immediately blurted out the fact that the crown prince could use magic. Luhan was confused, but it didn't stop him from acting. Luhan praised Meal's intelligence and encouraged him to continue. Meal's spirits were instantly boosted, and he started complaining about the crown prince and Alia's case, then pretended to be pitiful, saying Meal was wrongly accused. Luhan expressed agreement, then inquired about his attendant, Dika. Meal was startled by the sudden appearance of this person. Dika also expressed agreement and even winked at Meal. Then the smooth-talking Luhan leaned close to Meal, inviting him to lunch. However, Meal's Mary Sue fantasy was quickly shattered, as it was a meal for 4 people. At the dining table, Meal learned that the court lady had long planned to annex Kruya, so she had sent an imperial person named Picasso to make contact. The court lady thought Luhan didn't believe in magic. When Yas was young, he had fled to Kruya because of the assassination of Isis's father, so Luhan and Yas might know each other. To avoid being invaded by Kruya, the father wanted Isis to become the empress, thereby indirectly controlling the empire. However, Luhan's expression was full of disdain, clearly knowing something. The court lady hinted at Pika to propose a marriage alliance, but unexpectedly, Luhan didn't acknowledge it, claiming he would marry after defeating the empire. Pika also switched sides at the last moment, leaving the court lady furious but unable to express it. Then Luhan summoned Marquis Piat, who was the main person responsible for this war. The two arranged some tactics, but Piat suddenly proposed to go along. The main purpose of going to the empire was to find something. In the empire, Alia was surprised by Meal's escape. The two talked about Isis's divorce being for the purpose of attacking the empire. However, the mantis stalks the cicada. Unaware of the oriole behind, Arthur had a face full of strategic planning. His empire was about to be attacked, yet this crown prince looked completely in control, because he already knew Isis's plan. Soon, he would lead disguised soldiers into the noble mansions. Although Alia trusted Yas very much, she couldn't help but worry about the consequences of war. Yas, however, kept something from Alia, seeming to want to give her a surprise. At the Rost family's dining table, the lady mentioned Meal's thoughtlessness. Alia took the opportunity to suggest that they still needed her father's help. Cain suddenly hugged her away, saying he was now the head of this family. Alia suddenly realized how selfish this family was. The count didn't trust his ex-wife. Cain didn't trust his father. Meal was very resistant. He and his mother were equally stubborn and selfish, but this made it easier for them to transfer assets. Alia and her mother looked evil. Soon Cain welcomed the disguised soldiers in. However, these people were surprisingly respectful to Alia. Alia guessed they might be wary of the crown prince, so she should help her husband too. Alia then suggested that they shouldn't be so formal, and should eat and drink freely. Sure enough, these people started to revel unrestrained. Although Cain was unhappy inside, he couldn't express it. Alia and her mother, however, had knowing smiles. This fool hadn't realized that the count's mansion was already an empty shell. Alia had gone to great lengths to empty the count's mansion, comforting the tortured maid with a face full of pity, saying they could now directly buy things with money. No need to wash bedding and vegetables every day. After all, they were all Cain's honored guests. They only needed to purchase through her invested food store, and Alia could earn commission fees while lying down. On the carriage, Marquis Piat and Pika were talking. Piat's purpose in coming to the empire was to find his son Chloe's child, that is, his own granddaughter, and there was a girl who looked exactly the same by the crown prince's side. Chloe had been reluctant to inherit the title of Marquis for fear of getting involved in trouble. If he could find his granddaughter, perhaps the Piat family would have a successor. Luhan and Yas had known all this early on. Chloe had been looking for his first love all these years. And Alia was also of true noble blood. Who knows? Those who once looked down on Alia's birth might be afraid of being slapped in the face. Piet and Pika excitedly visited the Count, immediately recognizing his son's first love. Then Pika suggested going to eat, but Piet was eager to see his granddaughter. As soon as the door opened, he saw Alia. Although Alia was very suspicious of Pika's appearance, Piet's intense gaze was too fervent, unable to hide his inner excitement at all. This hair, these eyes, it's exactly like Chloe. She must be his granddaughter. The man's door was knocked loudly. He thought his wife had come and immediately perked up. Seeing Pika, he was instantly speechless, like a frost-bitten eggplant. Just as Yas turned to close the door, a cane wedged it open. It was Marquis Piet. Yas sat face to face with him. Piet was puzzled about how Yas knew the truth. Yas said he only learned Piet's name through prey. Piet instantly recalled various events from his youth. Feeling a surge of guilt, Piet immediately received news of his son Chloe's love affair. The young nobleman, heartbroken after being told he was a gentleman, had a chance encounter with a courtesan and fell in love at first sight. He was eventually brought back to Kruya. Although his son's love affair was terrible, at least they had granddaughter Alia. Yas was suddenly surrounded by low pressure, realizing that this old man was actually acting on his wife's intentions. Although Piet's face was full of joy as he spoke of the benefits of Alia returning to Kruya, Yas was still furious. The onlooker Bika calmly sipped his green tea. Early the next morning, the young couple met again wearing matching outfits. Yas brought up the topic of Alia's biological father, worried that Alia might leave when she comes of age. Alia laughed, thinking Yas was too adorable. Yas then spoke directly, his sweet words making Alia shy. Alia told Yas that someone who didn't appear in times of crisis, even if they appeared now, what difference would it make? But Yas was still worried about Alia, expressing that he only wanted to be with Yas now. Yas's heart instantly blossomed. Outside the car, Count Piet, understanding his granddaughter's wishes, decided he could only give up for now. Yas had a smug and sunere expression. On the other side, the Countess learned that there was a problem at the villa and hurriedly called back, only to see an unexpected person. Piet introduced himself to the Countess, mentioning Chloe's name. The Countess fell silent, saying she didn't know him at all. But when Piet turned the topic to Alia, the Countess suddenly slammed the table and started cursing at the old man furiously. Yas awkwardly tried to mediate, introducing Piet as the Marquis of Kruya. The Countess realized that noble blood flowed in Alia's veins. However, confirming based on appearance alone was unreliable. Dia suggested there was a way to prove it. At night, the young couple met again under the moonlight. Yas picked up Alia and carried her to the holy water pool. The luminous pool exuded a vague sense of mystery. Yas told Alia to touch the pool for good luck. Alia reached her hand in but wasn't rejected by the holy water. Yas smiled, explaining that Alia's grandmother had once been blessed by holy water, so if Alia had royal blood, she naturally wouldn't be rejected by the pool. Alia looked at the dumbfounded Yas, gradually realizing something was amiss. This woman of lowly status actually had royal blood? Yas's behavior was strange, and he kept staring at Alia's hand. Although Alia's heart trusted Yas, she still had some doubts. Alia placed her hand on the hourglass, and her ring immediately emitted a dazzling light. Alia thought that the hourglass's power might be related to the royal family, and Yas might have discovered something, but he was also waiting for something. Alia decided to confess to Yas about the secret of the hourglass and that she had lived one more life than him. If calculated by time, Alia was a generation older than Yas. Alia found Kane and expressed her desire to throw a big birthday party. Obviously, this fool hadn't realized Alia's scheme yet, and was even smugly thinking he was the head of the family and Alia had to come to beg him. As her birthday approached, Alia wore a green mermaid dress, welcoming commoner students, but was mocked by the nobles. The commoners were embarrassed by the taunts, but Alia told the nobles to get lost quickly, even thoughtfully preparing carriages. Infuriating the arrogant nobles, Alia's bold behavior stunned the commoners, who praised the single lady. This scene was witnessed by her best friend Sarah, who felt relieved that Alia had grown up and could handle things on her own. Sarah then took out the birthday gift she had prepared for Alia. Alia promised to attend Sarah's wedding and catch the bouquet. Alia thought about how Sarah would become the mistress of the empire's largest family in the future. Feeling secure with such strong backing, Annie tactlessly asked why Yas hadn't arrived yet. Although Alia understood Yas was busy, she still felt inexplicably upset. Just then, a luxurious carriage stopped at the door. Yas had brought 2 carriages full of gifts to see his wife. Aaliyah's mood instantly brightened, deciding to reluctantly forgive him given her cute boyfriend's sincerity. Alia held Yas's hand, deciding to tell him her secret. Yas gently comforted Alia, saying that loving someone means accepting and embracing everything, and there was no need to feel anxious or pressured. Alia nervously sat on the sofa and confessed to Yas about her ability to reverse time, explaining that her deep sleep and glowing ring were superpowers. Yas expressed regret, admitting he had once doubted Alia. The two gazed at each other lovingly, and Yas pointed out that superpowers were exclusive to the royal family. Since Alia wasn't royalty, she would have to pay a greater price. Alia was confused, and Yas realized she didn't know about her background yet. Although Alia's grandmother wasn't royalty, she had been blessed by holy water and gained abilities. However, activating these abilities required a great stimulus. What had caused Alia to gain her powers? Do you believe in superpowers that can turn back time? Alia recalled being sent to the guillotine in her previous life, her former self struggling so desperately. What did this unexpectedly appearing hourglass represent? Perhaps it was the will of fate. Hearing Alia's description, Yas immediately wanted to draw his sword and eliminate all obstacles for his wife. Alia hurriedly explained that she had actually returned to the distant past unintentionally, although embarrassed. Dating Yas was like an older sister with a young puppy. Yas instantly understood why Alia was so skilled in romance and always remained calm in various situations. Perhaps true love is the honesty between two people. Even without superpowers, Yas would unwaveringly choose Alia. Yas leaned his head closer to Alia, who gently blocked him, reminding Yas that even though she had lived an extra life, her body hadn't matured. The two sat sweetly together, discussing Alia's unknown past. On the other side, the smooth-talking Lu Han, after meeting with Isis, prepared several boxes of cash and casually mentioned that he had forgotten the wedding time. He also announced that he would enter the palace tomorrow. Isis was surprised by his actions, and even more surprising was the man next to Lu Han who looked exactly like Arya. However, questioning Meal would be of no use, as it was clear that this young girl seemed to be head over heels for the handsome man. She directly helped Lu Han speak, leaving Isis utterly speechless. Oscar pointed out that things were strange and even kept many documents from the nobility faction. Isis suddenly shouted at his brother, "What can we do now?" Isis angrily berated his brother for being useless. Oscar could only apologize, looking meek and submissive. As nobles, is it really impossible to be kind? Mother suddenly found Arya and hesitantly brought up the topic of her father. Arya thought her mother had found a new partner. The Countess almost spat out her tea. Arya said she wouldn't forgive her biological father, but if her mother had found her own happiness, she would fully support her. Outside the window, Yas held a bouquet of tulips, and Arya eagerly walked out. Yas smoothly took Arya's hand, and Arya understood that perhaps at this moment, having someone worth accompanying by her side was the greatest satisfaction. As their lips gradually drew closer and the atmosphere heated up, a guard suddenly spoke. Yas, whose good moment was interrupted, sarcastically mocked with an annoyed face. While Arya trembled shyly, the two walked into the dining room together, but unexpectedly ran into Lu Han and Isis. What a coincidence. Except for Lu Han's happy face, the other three were full of disgust and shock. This young king was inviting the empire's crown prince to dine, while the crown prince looked like he didn't want to bother with him. Surprisingly, the crown princess agreed. Yas and Arya slowly sat down. Isis was curious that Lu Han actually knew Yas. Lu Han said that he was, after all, the ruler of a country. How could he not have met the empire's crown prince? Arya suddenly realized, looking at Yas in disbelief, not understanding why her husband hadn't told her such an important thing. Yas felt wronged because he never intended for Arya to know this person. Then Yas glared fiercely at Lu Han, but Lu Han cheerfully chatted with him about the restaurant. Isis noticed that their relationship seemed unusual, but both of them denied it. However, it looked like old acquaintances meeting, more than their relationship. Arya found Isis's reaction stranger. Logically, she was a very calm person, but today she seemed to have given up thinking. Recalling the plan Yas had mentioned, Arya felt there must be some secret hidden here. At this time, Lu Han began to chat with Arya, asking if she felt pressure being by the crown prince's side. Yas became furious, severely reprimanding him for trying to sow discord between the couple. Arya, however, didn't mind and took the opportunity to confess publicly, saying she only liked people with black hair and blue eyes. Lu Han was surprised by her boldness. While Yas fell into deep thought beside her, Arya noticed Yas's mood was off, so they hurriedly said goodbye. In the carriage, just as Arya was about to ask Yas what had happened, Yas looked at her pitifully. It turned out she was still hung up on the black hair, blue eyes incident. Mistakenly thinking Arya liked her for this reason, Arya was shocked, not expecting her husband could be so dense. After explaining, Yas finally understood she had overthought it, but she was still agitated about those men who had dated Arya. Seeing Yas's fragile and affectionate appearance, Arya decided to take the initiative, lest her husband keep overthinking. Yas blushed and her heart raced at her bold move, but still carefully reciprocated. The two kissed passionately, as if everything in the past no longer mattered. This woman kissing the crown prince angered her brother greatly. Arya said she was changing clothes and didn't want to deal with Cain. Cain was very dissatisfied with her cold attitude and angrily berated her for coming back so late yesterday, surely using business as an excuse to flirt with men outside. Arya was very impatient with his instigation, because Cain wasn't scolding her out of concern, but only had a strong possessiveness towards her, which made him jealous of other men. If that's the case, might as well provoke him a bit more. Sure enough, Cain was enraged by her frivolous remarks and shouted loudly. Mother walked out of the room, wondering what had happened. Cain wanted to take this opportunity to make a big deal out of it, but Mother didn't care at all and questioned why Cain was so angry. This made the surrounding maids whisper, further lowering their opinion of Cain. At this point, Cain had reached his limit and decided to exercise his right as the family head, ordering the maids to lock Arya in her room and not allow her out without his permission. As soon as he finished speaking, Mother hit him with a large penholder. Hein was about to have someone carry this stepmother out, but when he looked back, he found the atmosphere in the room was off, and not a single person in the room was on his side. At this moment, people from the Royal Night Order came to visit and arrested Cain for treason upon seeing him. Mother asked Arya if she knew anything about this, but Arya just smiled and said she needed to prepare for dinner with Arthur. On the other side, Isis was sitting in a carriage heading to the Imperial City. He felt very uneasy because they had agreed to attack the Imperial City at dawn, but now the streets were eerily quiet. Looking at Meal again, he found that he had already been bewitched by Lu Han. At this moment, the carriage stopped with a clang, and Isis knew they had reached their destination. Just as he was about to say something, he looked up to find Lu Han coldly staring at him. The carriage door opened, and a guard roughly grabbed Isis, surrounded by a sea of people, mostly members of the noble faction, while the crown prince and knights stood on the execution platform. Even Meal sobered up now. Clearly the plot had been exposed. At this moment, Meal heard a familiar voice, and looking up, it was indeed Arya. She smiled sweetly as always, but her words were so cold. Meal, I've missed you so much. All the rebellious nobles from these kingdoms have been captured. The crown prince has announced they will be sentenced to death. At this moment, Isis was somewhat flustered, wanting to use the seal on the alliance to implicate Lu Han. But Lu Han smiled slightly, revealing that those seals were all fake. Isis couldn't believe it, as he had clearly checked them. Just then, a figure emerged from beside Lu Han. It was Bika. He had forged the documents and seals, deceiving Isis and gaining his trust. Isis gritted his teeth, never imagining he'd be betrayed by someone close to him. Looking at the trapped Isis, Alia recalled his past with Meal, realizing that they weren't so foolish at the beginning. They rose to power not through wisdom, but through the influence of their noble families. Because of this status, they eliminated dissent, creating circles only accessible to nobles, and for a time became a powerful force in the kingdom. But as their followers gradually fell, Isis's vision became short-sighted, and he was ultimately defeated by the crown prince he once looked down upon. In this process, Alia played a crucial role. She strengthened the centrist faction, weakened the noble faction, allowing the crown prince's side to gradually grow stronger. Although for her, this was merely a path of revenge, for Arthur, it changed his destiny. Thus, he would give up the best position, letting Alia watch the downfall of the noble faction. As Isis was taken away, Alia began to ponder another question. What exactly was the relationship between Lu Han, who should have been an enemy, and Arthur? Was this incident merely mutual assistance between friends? Noticing Alia deep in thought, Lu Han wanted to come over and say hello, but but was blocked by Arthur before he could get close. The straightforward husband was very vigilant. No one except children under 10 allowed near. At this time, the guards were still escorting the criminals, and Alia noticed Meal among them. Despite everyone's objections, she requested the crown prince to show leniency towards Meal once more. The onlookers were in an uproar, surprised that Alia could forgive her vicious sister in such a situation, thinking she was like a living bodhisattva. Only Meal feared her sister's actions, not knowing what tricks she was up to. After calming the surrounding crowd, Alia once again pleaded with Yas, stating that she would keep Meal by her side in the future, doing her utmost to educate her properly and make her understand right from wrong. As her sister's face slowly approached, Meal's eyes gradually lost their spirit. This woman was pleading for a traitor to the kingdom. Luhan looked troubled after hearing this, while Yas fell into deep thought. After all, the person in question was Alia's enemy, so perhaps it would be better to let Alia make the decision herself. Meal was frightened by the sudden change, never expecting to have her life spared because of her sister. But the fear in her heart wouldn't subside, feeling that her sister's parting words were deeply meaningful, not knowing exactly what she was trying to express. At this time, all the criminals had been imprisoned and taken away. The guards asked Yas if he wanted to return to the palace. Yas thought for a moment and decided to have a clear talk with his wife. Luhan, seeing this, smiled brightly and said, "Count me in." Yas turned his head, using his killing intent to indicate that he'd better know his limits, then left with Alia. Alia looked at the puppy-like man in front of her, with his pitiful expression, and smiled slightly, revealing her true thoughts. Upon hearing that Alia planned to take revenge herself, Yas instantly understood her carefully orchestrated plan, and apologized for almost disrupting it. Alia was very satisfied with Arthur's perceptiveness, gently leaned close to her husband to say thank you, then asked what agreement he had made with Luhan. Arthur frankly said he hadn't done much, only promising to maintain 50 years of peace with the kingdom of Kruya. At this time, the king of Kruya had arrived at the empire's treasury. Looking at the wealth plundered from the nobles, he felt a sense of relief in his heart. If these ambitious people had ascended to the throne, the fate of neighboring countries would be unimaginable, and the kingdom of Kruya would not have escaped disaster. Bika stood by, smiling and agreeing, only praising Luhan for his kingly demeanor. Luhan accepted calmly, then stated that he wanted to take away the plundered wealth. Dika's smile remained unchanged, only softly relaying the words of his crown prince. The image of Yas's murderous face instantly flashed in Luhan's mind, and he laughingly changed the subject. On the other side, the empire's interrogators were collecting testimonies from the nobles. As long as everyone unanimously denounced the Duke's rebellion, the empire would be lenient towards their families. Oscar had anticipated this phenomenon. After all, he was the first to denounce the Duke's household. Yas was curious about why he did this, but found that Oscar was also just begging for peace. He felt relieved inside because Oscar had once gained Alia's attention, but now it seemed his competitiveness was still not as good as his own. At this time, Alia arrived at the execution ground, lamenting internally that it was too wasteful to send off criminals here. This rebellious evil woman was imprisoned but still wouldn't stop talking. She complained that Isis's attempt to overthrow the crown prince led to things turning out this way. Isis was annoyed by her and retorted that if they had eliminated Alia earlier, things wouldn't have gotten so out of hand. The two started arguing. Stupid Cain sat aside sighing, feeling that more and more people were denouncing the Duke's household, and at this rate, Isis would soon be executed. Isis understood this in his heart. He just never expected to be so thoroughly defeated. His usually timid brother had chosen to betray him, and the crown prince he initially thought was a fool had outmaneuvered him. When exactly did things start to change? At this moment, someone came to visit the prison. Alia's beautiful face appeared before everyone. She invited Meal to have some snacks with her. Ignoring the seething Isis, Meal was very fearful, reluctantly following behind her. Isis also realized that it was Alia who had ruined his entire plan. If it weren't for this woman bewitching the crown prince, the noble faction would have already achieved a great victory. Looking at her elegant and composed sister before her, Meal's mind was racing, but she still couldn't guess her sister's intentions. Alia took a sip of coffee and began her gentle persuasion, stating that there was actually no irreconcilable hatred between them, that she had always been tolerant and kind to Meal, but Meal had been misled by villains, causing her to become what she is now. After hearing her sister's words, Meal suddenly understood, feeling that her sister made a lot of sense, and shifted all responsibility onto Isis. Alia had anticipated this reaction, gaining Meal's trust with a few words. expressing that she would definitely rescue her, while internally contemplating how to make her life even more miserable. At this time, the foolish Cain received a letter from his mother, thinking that the Count's family couldn't leave her pillow, feeling somewhat smug inside, unaware that his mother had already begun dividing the property, tricking the Count into signing the divorce agreement, obtaining all of the Count's wealth, and sending the Count to a nursing home to spend his days, making it difficult for him to see his mother again. Arya admired her mother's superior tactics. The two sat side by side in the courtyard, feeling that spring was about to arrive. This woman obtained all of her adoptive father's wealth, and the Count's maids praised her, saying their treatment was even more generous than before. Arya looked at the intact hourglass before her, feeling that her life had indeed undergone a tremendous change compared to her previous life. But to enjoy this hard-earned happiness, she must wait until she no longer needs the hourglass. After arranging her attire, Arya set off with her mother towards the execution ground. On the way, they happened to meet the elaborately dressed Luhan. Arya was curious that Luhan hadn't returned to Kriya yet. Luhan said that after doing so much, he naturally had to come and see the conclusion. At this moment, her mother looked at the man beside Luhan with a panicked expression. Arya felt puzzled, discovering that this man looked quite similar to herself. At this time, Yas also emerged from the crowd, witnessing a joyous family reunion. Mother apologized to Arya, stating that she should have told her about this earlier. Father apologized to mother, saying he shouldn't have come at all. Luhan and Yas looked at each other, also surprised by this complex family situation. Arya calmly analyzed the current situation, deciding to discuss the topic of her birth father later. Mother was very touched by this, unaware that Arya was also extremely curious inside. As the crowd surged, the convicted criminals were successively escorted up. Yas worried that Arya would feel uncomfortable after seeing this, not knowing that Arya wanted to witness this moment. At this time, Aethys was also brought in bound in chains, with the onlookers hurling abuse, cursing Aethys for being inhuman, for turning them into this state, only to be intimidated by Aethys's glare. Looking at the fallen and destitute, yet still fierce-eyed Aethys, Luhan seemed to become somewhat interested. He explained Arya's background to Aethys, informing him that Arya was actually the granddaughter of Marquis Piet. Aethys became flushed with anxiety, arguing that there was no evidence for this. Luhan was accustomed to his reaction and proceeded to reveal the royal family's secret to him. It turned out that when Yas was being hunted by the Duke's mansion as a child, it was Luhan who saved him. He knew that people with royal bloodlines would involuntarily use superpowers when facing life-threatening crises, and Aethys's ancestors seemed to have royal members too, so he might also have such abilities. After hearing the secret Luhan told, Aethys's eyes gradually calmed down. Arya and others also began to be on guard, preventing unexpected situations during the execution. The rebellious nobles of this kingdom were to be executed. Aethys was somewhat disturbed by Luhan's words, unsure whether the other was mocking him or giving him a way out. At this time, Viscount Marriott was sentenced to be beheaded in public, and the nobles all protested. Wasn't it agreed that cooperating with accusations would reduce the sentence? The judge stated, everyone accusing each other actually confirmed their crimes. Neil also learned that he was sentenced to 50 years in prison, very angry at Arya for deceiving him, not knowing that Arya had already applied for a suspended sentence, allowing him to move freely under the supervision of a guardian. After hearing the judge's words, Neil's face instantly brightened, feeling that his sister looked so merciful and beautiful today. Surely his brother's sentence would be exactly the same. But then he heard that the foolish Cain was sentenced to death. Cain said, I didn't hear that. Please say it again. The judge continued from where he left off, and Cain thus escaped death. Seeing the two's joyful appearance, the nobles sentenced to death were very jealous, but the remaining nobles quickly joined their ranks. As the leader of everyone, Aethys's head was to be hung at the capital's entrance for a month, which was an extremely cruel punishment. Seeing that he was about to lose his life, Aethys inquired about the superpowers from Yas, surprisingly discovering that Yas indeed possessed the ability to teleport, which explained what had happened during this time. But he wasn't very clear about Luhan's purpose in telling him this, wondering if he had some expectations of him. At this time, Oscar came to see his sister off. Aethys asked Yas about his brother's future fate. Yas said he would strip Oscar of his title, making him a commoner, and it would be futile for the noble faction to try to make him a representative again. Aethys recalled everything his brother had done, feeling that becoming a commoner might not be a bad thing, and surprisingly felt extremely calm inside, as if a heavy shackle had been lifted. Watching Aethys, the leader of the noble faction, Being executed, Arya pondered about the necessary conditions for the royal family to awaken superpowers. If it only appears in life and death situations, then there would be too few people awakening superpowers. What exactly are the hidden prerequisites? The scene shifts. Young Arya is being bullied by two ruffians. Young Yas slowly walks over, covered in blood, scaring away the bullies, but the next second he collapses, frightening young Arya, who thinks she's about to die, hurriedly lifting his body and walking towards home. Arya and Yas had known each other since childhood. The noble faction was rampant, led by the Duke's mansion, blatantly assassinating Yas, the crown prince. Yas appeared on the street covered in blood, seeing ruffians surrounding a little girl in an alley, bullying her. Yas saw these ruffians flee in panic, but having lost too much blood, he finally collapsed. Little Arya used all her strength to drag Yas back home. After waking up, Yas hugged his knees, silently feeling sorry for himself, believing there couldn't be a more miserable, fallen prince in the world than himself, fleeing and alone, with nowhere to call home. Little Arya keenly sensed Yas's sadness and stuffed the steamed bun she had been reluctant to eat into Yas's mouth. Yas couldn't bite through the black, hard cornbread. Seeing little Aaliyah chewing grass with relish, Yas suddenly realized she had been too pessimistic earlier. The girl enthusiastically handed Yas the grass she was holding, but her hand was too heavy, slapping Yas's knee wound. Yas was in unbearable pain and decided to go to the hospital for treatment. Little Aaliyah, backlit, tightly grasped Yas's hand and led her to the hospital. After treating all her wounds, big and small, Yas got new clothes for herself and Aaliyah. Yas was incredibly grateful for the gems in her pocket, which saved her and little Aaliyah from hunger and cold. Watching the girl eating with relish, Yas felt a satisfaction she had never experienced before. The teachers avoided her, the nobles endlessly hunted her, and even her own father hid away, not caring about her life or death. Only little Aaliyah brought her a different kind of warmth, looking at her with admiring eyes when she was miserable and destitute. Just then, deadly danger was approaching. Yas picked up little Aaliyah and ran, the violent movement reopening her wounds. The grim-faced killer followed her blood trail, closing in step by step. Yas couldn't run anymore and could only shield Aaliyah with her body. The killer raised his curved blade with a sinister smile. In a flash, Yas and Aaliyah suddenly disappeared, leaving only a smear of bright red blood on the empty ground. It turned out that all members of the royal family possessed strange abilities that would be triggered when in mortal danger. To escape the killer, Yas teleported with Aaliyah to a secluded alley. Looking at the worried little Aaliyah before her, she understood that she had a mission to complete and it was time to leave. Yas hypnotized little Aaliyah to forget her and the recent events, only repeatedly urging the girl to survive at all costs. In the present, seeing Yas's tall figure, Aaliyah couldn't help but recall this past event, only that she could never clearly see the little boy's face. Aaliyah tried hard to see clearly the boy who had protected her in her memory, but his face remained blurry, even though the hourglass of time could take her back to her childhood. Looking at Yas's imposing figure on the execution ground, Aaliyah gave up searching for the little boy from her childhood. Yas had given her pursuit new meaning. The helpless young Yas had now grown into a towering tree. Yas finally saw the day of his revenge. Raising his arm, the traitor was executed. The people below enthusiastically joined in the cheering. As his sister's head fell, Oscar trembled powerlessly with closed eyes in the crowd. He had long known his sister's crimes deserved death, but when the day came, he still didn't know how to accept it. But to protect Aaliyah, that little girl who was as weak and helpless as him and could only cry, he stood up strongly for the first time, opposing his own family and exposing all the crimes his family had committed as a witness. Oscar looked at Aaliyah high above and was stunned for a moment. He didn't know why he suddenly thought Aaliyah was a pitiful person. The past had all dispersed like clouds. His family had committed many evil deeds, and his sister was only getting what she deserved. He himself had only been a bystander for so many years. Fortunately, he still had a long life ahead to atone and witness everything. With matters settled, Aaliyah and her group returned to the mansion and began to discuss her parents' situation. Young Master Chloe, as the eldest son of the Marquise's household, felt deeply guilty about the duties he had neglected over the years and didn't know how to face Aaliyah and her mother. The madam had a sharp tongue but a soft heart. How could Aaliyah, as her daughter, not know this? Now, regarding the matter of her royal abilities, Aaliyah found answers from her father, but what she didn't know was why her never-before-seen father suddenly appeared, and what his intentions were. Chloe stammered out his promise to Karen, and although he felt he had no right to be there, he still wanted to try to propose to Karen. Luhan, while supporting Chloe, also encouraged Aaliyah to follow her parents to the kingdom of Krua. Hearing this, Yas could no longer sit still. He stood up excitedly and confronted Luhan, trying to prevent Aaliyah from going to the kingdom of Krua. Aaliyah, hearing the noisy voices around her, paid no attention and drank her cooled tea, her thoughts drifting. Blood-related family. She seemed to have a bit of expectation. At this time, Meal was crouching pitifully in the corner. Aaliyah had left her in prison when she departed. The once high and mighty young lady was now being ordered around by her own maid. Meal watched helplessly as Aaliyah left without taking her along. Brought back to prison again, she crouched on the ground pitifully, suspecting that Aaliyah was deceiving her. Just then, the rusty iron door of the cell creaked open, and Maid Annie appeared before Meal, taking her out of prison as her guardian. Annie actually made Meal sit with the coachman. When the carriage passed through the bustling market, everyone recognized Meal, and various derogatory remarks floated past her ears. Meal couldn't bear it and kept urging the coachman to speed up. The carriage arrived at Aaliyah's mansion. Meal only cared about rushing towards Aaliyah to cry about her humiliation, but was unexpectedly stopped by Annie. Seeing Annie criticize her for being too shabby and smelly, while Aaliyah didn't help her but instead praised Annie. Meal, who had always been pampered, stood there dumbfounded. It wasn't until Annie led her into the house that she reacted, questioning Annie about why she had become a servant, and recklessly calling Madame Karen a whore. Annie directly poured the hand-washing water over Meal's head. Looking at Meal's miserable state, she warned her to be careful with her words and actions, and that she must adapt to a life where she would starve if she didn't work. The next day, Aaliyah invited Kane and Meal to dine at her mansion. At the dining table, Aaliyah discussed the old Earl's convalescence with Kane. Hearing about the exorbitant care fees and the news that he would have to take care of the old man for the rest of his life, Neil felt like the sky was falling, and excitedly asked his servant, "Isn't life supposed to be temporary?" He desperately wanted an affirmative answer. Taeyeon looked awkwardly at his naive sister and didn't respond. Aaliyah, sitting in her high seat, took in the expressions on both their faces. Looking at Kane, she probably knew about the news of her stepmother's new love, but Kane had become self-aware and obedient after a series of setbacks, recognizing his own position. However, Meal still clings to her unrealistic dreams of being a lady. Alia couldn't understand how someone like Meal could exist in this world. She had previously driven away her mother with all kinds of derogatory and insulting words, and now how dare she suggest that her stepmother should take over the mess at home. Looking at Meal's ugly face, Alia was extremely grateful for her stubbornness. If this continues, the game will be more fun. How could Meal willingly be burdened by her paralyzed father for half her life? What surprising performance would Meal give if she pushed her further? Alia looked forward to her becoming even worse, to become a strong argument worthy of her revenge. The once arrogant and evil Meal, now reduced to a street rat, can only make a living as a servant at home to survive. Now, her father can no longer provide her with a comfortable life, lying in a nursing home, requiring her to pay exorbitant care fees. Meal maliciously hopes her father will die soon, to avoid burdening her for the rest of her life. At the dining table, Alia specially invited Kayan and Meal, just to watch this show. Just as Meal was unrealistically fantasizing about continuing to be a haughty noble lady in her stepmother and stepsister's house, the maid Annie interrupted her words. Meal, embarrassed and angry, mocked Annie's commoner status, hoping to shut her up, but Alia seemed not to hear her speak, focusing on listening to Annie's complete viewpoint, and even expressed strong agreement. Meal felt extremely wronged. She didn't understand why she couldn't continue being a noble lady and had to work to support her father, but she couldn't refute Alia's words, so she could only lower her head in silence, silently hating everyone present. The next day at noon, Meal returned to her work post. As a duke's daughter who had never done manual labor, how could Meal understand how to do a servant's job after hearing it just once? She put the water bucket in the middle of the corridor, accidentally kicking it over and wetting her colleague's dress. Seeing that it was the reckless Meal causing trouble again, Annie punished her by not allowing her to eat lunch and making her wipe the floor dry. To teach her a lesson, since Meal became a servant, she has only caused more trouble. The original servants in the residence now have more work to do. They gossip in the corners expressing their dissatisfaction with her, but due to Meal's former status as a lady and Annie's care for her, they dare not show it openly. Alia has been paying attention to everything happening in the mansion. After dinner, she took Annie to her room to talk, hinting that she should be stricter with Meal. Unexpectedly, the kind-hearted Annie naively believed that with her help, Meal would become as positive and upbeat as herself. While they were discussing, Meal, who hadn't finished her work, barged into Aaliyah's room with the maid Jessica. Aaliyah received a wedding invitation from her good friend Lady Sarah, and Annie was excited about this banquet. After the Duke's family's downfall, the Marquise's family was thriving. At Lady Sarah's wedding banquet, all the noble ladies would attend in full dress. Annie was secretly thinking that her lady must outshine everyone. Just as she was considering whether to commission a designer to make a special dress for her lady, she heard Aaliyah shyly say that Yas had already prepared everything for her. Annie didn't feel discouraged. Instead, she became even more excited. In Annie's eyes, her admired lady and the crown prince were a perfect match. While Annie was flattering from all angles, Aaliyah noticed Annie's outdoor outfit today, and took the initiative to ask about the progress of Baron Bowden and Annie's relationship. Annie's girlish thoughts being mentioned made her blush. Meal had become a street rat that everyone wanted to beat, but she still hadn't faced reality and even wanted to cause trouble. She barged into Aaliyah's room with the maid Jessica. Seeing Meal appear here at this time, Annie frowned and scolded her for not following the rules. Meal looked pitifully towards Aaliyah, but unfortunately, Aaliyah didn't care about her pleading gaze. After Diane left, blushing from Aaliyah's teasing, Aaliyah seemed to finally notice Meal's presence. Meal threw herself at Aaliyah's feet, weakly leaning on Aaliyah's knee and crying sorrowfully. When Aaliyah started to show concern, Meal tearfully poured out her grievances to Aaliyah with a heartbroken expression. Meal distorted facts to smear Annie, hoping Aaliyah would fire Annie and all the maids she disliked. Aaliyah, of course, wouldn't believe anything coming out of Meal's mouth, but still comforted Meal, saying she would punish Annie. Seeing Meal obsessively persuading her to fire the mansion's maids, Aaliyah subtly pushed forward her revenge against Meal, wanting to make Meal experience the unbearable pain of her previous life. Aaliyah cupped Meal's face, gently inviting her to accompany her to the wedding held by the Marquise's family, expressing her hope that it would bring Meal happiness. Listening to Aaliyah's description of the wedding scene, Meal suddenly felt longing, stopped her series of malicious complaints, and happily accepted Aaliyah's invitation. After Meal left, Aaliyah revealed a cold expression. Seeing Meal walking step by step in the direction she was guiding, Aaliyah was extremely pleased. Tomorrow, it won't be the luxurious life Meal desires. She will make Meal clearly realize that she is no longer the proud noble lady she once was. Recalling Meal's disgusting face in her previous life, Aaliyah was merely returning everything in full. The next day at noon, Annie routinely checked the maid's work results. After so many days, Meal still showed no improvement, just carelessly going through the motions. Yesterday's hint from Aaliyah had an unintended effect. Annie ordered the maid Mana to help Meal complete her work. Mana was already exhausted from finishing her own work, and after Annie left, Mana irritably told Meal to finish the remaining work herself. Under Mana's supervision, Meal managed to eat lunch. Meal disdained eating with the lowly maids, so she ate alone in the shade. Even though she had been stripped of her noble status and reduced to a commoner, Meal still stubbornly maintained her ridiculous class dignity. Today is the wedding banquet of Aaliyah's good friend, Lady Sarah. Outside, the crown prince alighted from a luxurious carriage, looking at his wife whom he hadn't seen for a long time, wearing the dress he had carefully prepared for her. Arthur was deeply moved and praised Aaliyah. As Yas gentlemanly invited Aaliyah to board the carriage, Meal appeared behind Aaliyah with an innocent face. When Meal expressed her desire to ride in the same carriage with herself and Aaliyah, Yas's face immediately darkened. As the saying goes, spoiled men are the luckiest. Seeing Yas hanging his head and saying he wanted to spend time alone with her, Aaliyah's heart melted. Without a second thought, she sent Meal off to find Annie, leaving only a fleeting remark, and Annie stood there in a daze. Seeing Meal standing there obliviously, Annie was extremely frustrated, shouting at Meal to know her place. When Baron Bowden's carriage arrived, Annie explained to the Baron that she needed to ride with Meal. Baron Bowden, being a gentle-natured gentleman, naturally wouldn't refuse Annie's request. Although at this moment, Annie desperately wished that Baron Bowden would act like Prince Yas and refuse Meal with a spoiled attitude. A suffocating silence filled the carriage. Baron Bowden awkwardly urged the coachman to speed up. In contrast, Aaliyah and Yas's carriage was filled with sweet laughter and chatter. Annie's group arrived at the wedding venue first. As they got out of the carriage, Annie complained with a frown that her alone time with Baron Bowden had been ruined. To her surprise, Meal not only felt no shame but also brazenly told Annie to thank her, claiming that if she hadn't chosen to attend this engagement party, Annie, as her guardian, would have had to stay at home and couldn't come to the party. Hearing such words, Annie was furious. Just then, Alia and Yas's carriage arrived. Seeing Aaliyah's noble demeanor, Meal muttered to herself, still looking down on Aaliyah's commoner status. Annie, hearing Meal's words, was instantly enraged. At this point, everyone's attention turned to the two of them. The nobles at the venue recognized Meal, and the crowd began to stir. A notorious evil woman who betrayed her parents and country had no right to attend this wedding. Just as Meal was feeling extremely embarrassed, Alia appeared. She wouldn't let Meal escape so easily. Considering various factors, Alia decided to have Meal stay in the carriage and not come out. Meal looked in disbelief at her sister, who she remembered as gentle, now turning away and walking towards the party. Her best friend Sarah was about to become a bride, and Alia offered her most sincere blessings. Sarah smiled and held Alia's hand, inviting her to put on this significant crown for her. Alia didn't dare to agree rashly. According to custom, the crown should be put on by the bride's mother, but she couldn't refuse any of Sarah's requests. She always remembered Sarah, who had accompanied her through those years. Alia took the expensive crown from Sarah's hand, solemnly placed it on Sarah's head, and offered her wedding wishes. Sarah was as happy as a child, easily leaning against Alia's face. Ceremonial cannons roared, and applause erupted all around. Alia stood below, watching Sarah enter the hall of marriage. You stand on the bridge watching the scenery, while those watching the scenery are looking at you from below the bridge. Yas gazed at Alia lovingly, his eyes never leaving her, suddenly asking Alia what color she liked. Alia earnestly praised the color of Yas's eyes, recalling how Arthur once risked his life to save her, that moment making Alia fall in love with those eyes forever. Alia smiled and told Yas that if the color of the ring in the future matched the color of her pupils, she would feel very secure, as if he were guarding her side. Hearing Alia's words, Yas gently held Alia's hand, stating that he would always be by her side. Meanwhile, Meal in the carriage was leaning against the window, watching the couples at the party. At this moment, the carriage door suddenly opened, and Annie appeared with some cake and fruit plates. Seeing Meal silently staring at the food in her hands, kind-hearted Annie felt very guilty, thinking it was because of her that Meal had been discovered. To her surprise, Meal turned around the next second and dumped all the food Annie had brought outside the carriage. Meal felt humiliated by Annie, thinking what right did Annie, a commoner, have to act kindly in front of her? Seeing Baron Bowden at the party gracefully inviting Annie to dance, Meal became extremely frantic, not understanding how Annie, a commoner, could deserve happiness. As the party gradually came to an end, Alia remembered Meal in the carriage and declined Arthur's invitation to continue dating. Preparing to leave, noticing the disappointed look on Arthur's face, Alia gently told him to learn to wait. Arthur immediately promised Alia that he definitely had enough patience to wait for her. Hearing Alia and Arthur's laughter outside the carriage, Meal felt a dull pain in her heart, thinking this should have been her life and happiness, but it was stolen by Alia, that evil woman. Meal was furious, her hands tightly clenched into fists as she pounded on the carriage. How did Meal react when she learned Alia was a princess? As Alia and Meal returned from Sarah's party, Jessie immediately took the weak Meal from Alia's hands, following Alia's orders to escort Meal to her bedroom. Alia had planned to go together based on the results, but was called by her mother, Mentor, to discuss the key. As Jessie was helping Meal up the stairs, suddenly, Meal overheard their conversation about Alia's birth father. She grabbed Jess's hand, saying she felt dizzy and needed to rest for a moment. Although it would have been more convenient to rest in the bedroom, Jessie didn't understand Meal's intention but didn't argue. At this time, Madame Karen was educating Alia that she shouldn't address her father by name, and arranged for Alia to visit Kruya before her coming-of-age ceremony. Alia hesitantly asked if she could not go, as her mother had seen her interaction with Yas at the party and mistakenly thought Alia's wedding was approaching. Madame Karen gently held Alia's hand, telling her that although she was often proud of Alia's excellence, to become a crown princess, this was far from enough. She had suffered greatly in her life regarding family matters, and didn't want Alia to follow in her footsteps. Seeing her mother's earnest expression, Alia reflected and felt that the noble class was indeed the mainstream. Perhaps being with Yas and often being in the public eye had gradually made her forget this fact. Meal heard that Alia was actually the princess of the Kruya Principality. This shocking secret made his heart race violently for a moment, and he didn't even hear Jessie calling him repeatedly. Aaliyah understood her mother's good intentions. He held his mother's hand and told her that he was Aaliyah's strongest support. Mrs. Karen felt very touched by Aaliyah's words. But which mother doesn't hope for her child to be better? Aaliyah couldn't resist her mother's nagging and smiled as she agreed to her mother's request. After seeing her mother off, Aaliyah immediately prepared to go upstairs. At this point, Neil began to panic, urging Jessie to take her away quickly. But it was too late. Aaliyah lifted her skirt and came to the stairs. In fact, she had noticed Neil eavesdropping while talking to her mother. Hearing Aaliyah ask why she was still here, Neil froze in place, mumbling and afraid to speak. Fortunately, Jessie answered this thorny question for her. Aaliyah didn't pursue Neil's responsibility, but instead smiled and asked Neil if she was feeling better. Aaliyah looked at the closed bedroom door and couldn't help but smile with confidence. Neil's malice made even her sister Aaliyah shudder. Aaliyah looked at Neil lying on the sofa, gently asking Neil if something had happened at the wedding. Hearing Aaliyah's question, Neil couldn't help but recall the humiliation at the banquet again. She suddenly screamed in anger, loudly accusing Annie of her crimes to Aaliyah. Jessie, sitting nearby, was frightened by the out-of-control Neil and could only quietly defend Annie. If Aaliyah hadn't asked Annie about the specific situation first, she might have believed Neil's lies. Looking at Annie's embarrassed expression, Aaliyah could guess that Neil was probably mocking Annie's commoner birth again. At that time, the kind-hearted Annie was carrying many desserts, preparing to send them to Neil. Hearing Annie's naive thoughts, Aaliyah didn't refute, but just looked at Annie's retreating figure and fell into deep thought. She remembered Neil's never-satisfied personality, and recalled Neil's detestable face in her previous life. Aaliyah knew that sympathy couldn't change Neil. After listening to Neil's accusations, Aaliyah suggested that she and Annie talk face-to-face to resolve the conflict between them. Neil, feeling guilty, didn't dare to agree and quickly refused Aaliyah's proposal, just tearfully kept bad-mouthing Annie and urging Aaliyah to fire Annie as soon as possible. Aaliyah cupped Neil's face, focused on looking into her eyes, comforting Neil not to be afraid, telling Neil that she wouldn't let anyone bully her. Perhaps the following words were not convenient to leak out. Aaliyah sent Jessie away with a single sentence. Neil was deceived by Aaliyah's gentle appearance, directly asking Aaliyah if she was really the princess of Kruyub Principality. Without realizing that she had exposed her eavesdropping behavior, Aaliyah admitted her identity, and reminded Neil not to spread this news. Hearing Aaliyah's admission, Neil looked at her with extreme admiration. Aaliyah with noble blood seemed to have layers of halos in Neil's eyes. At this moment, Aaliyah suddenly held Neil's hand and earnestly told Neil that as long as she did as before, all problems would be solved. Neil looked at Aaliyah in shock, stammering to ask what Aaliyah meant. Aaliyah mercilessly exposed that Neil had previously instructed Bailey to poison her tea. Looking at Aaliyah's approaching face, Neil was so frightened that she became incoherent, hurriedly shifting the blame to Emma. At this point, Aaliyah suddenly hugged Neil, stating that she didn't mean to blame her, then constantly hinting to Neil to poison Annie. Seeing Neil in front of her lowering her head in silence, just as Aaliyah was wondering if Neil had changed her nature, Neil laughed evilly. She had already imagined Annie's embarrassing appearance. Every time, Aaliyah's perception would be refreshed by Neil's malice. This woman's malice was chilling. Looking at Neil laughing uncontrollably in front of her, Aaliyah once again had a new understanding of her malice. A living human life was just a small joke in Neil's eyes. Aaliyah put her hand on the enraged Annie's shoulder, comforting her, and as agreed, informed Annie about Neil preparing afternoon tea for everyone. Aaliyah glanced at Neil eavesdropping behind the door, who was already starting to look forward to the afternoon tea. The appointed time arrived as scheduled. Neil was constantly adding medicine to the teapot. A little more, a little more. Then she realized that if she added poison to the teapot, Aaliyah and others would drink the poisoned tea along with Annie. Thinking of something, Neil suddenly smiled evilly. Her hand adding medicine became more fluid. Before the afternoon tea started, Aaliyah tried to give Neil one chance, specifically reminding her that oleander poison shouldn't be overdosed. Otherwise it would be a matter of life and death. Neil stammered in response. Aaliyah indicated that everything was ready. Just as Neil was bringing the tea to everyone, she found an unexpected person. Her own brother had suddenly appeared at the tea party. Feeling everyone's expectant gaze, Neil suddenly felt dizzy, nervous and shaking. To prevent her brother from drinking the poisoned tea, Neil forced a smile and said she had better tea. Unexpectedly, Annie directly grabbed the teapot, Meal watched helplessly as her brother picked up the teapot. She obediently told everyone that she needed to brew a better pot of tea. At this time, Aaliyah comforted Meal beside her, saying that her tea was the best tea. Brother Cain would only feel proud of her thoughtfulness. Meal cried out in pain. She didn't understand why things didn't go as planned. Aaliyah stared blankly at the out-of-control Meal. Just as she was considering whether to use the hourglass of time to return to before Meal lost control, Cain smiled and comforted his sister Meal, saying this as he drank the tea in his hand. In an instant, blood spurted uncontrollably from Cain's mouth. With a thud, the man fell to the ground, and the scene immediately became chaotic. Meal looked at her brother Cain on the ground, bleeding from 7 orifices, collapsed and unwilling to believe that he actually died at the hands of his dear sister who had loved him since childhood. This woman finally got her just desserts, from maid Emma to her father, and finally her own brother Cain. All died tragically by her own hands. Meal, in prison, looking at her blood-stained hands, shed tears of remorse. The tea party descended into chaos when Cain coughed up blood. Under Aaliyah's command, everyone calmed down. Jesse immediately went to summon a doctor. Annie put away the teapot as evidence of Meal's crime. Cain, bleeding from 7 orifices, still tightly held Aaliyah's hand. It must be said, Cain was indeed a good brother, apologizing to Aaliyah on Meal's behalf even before his death. Meal cautiously touched Cain's limp hand. At this moment, the doctor rushed in from outside, inquiring about the patient's condition. Upon hearing Cain's death diagnosis, Meal suddenly lunged towards Aaliyah. If it weren't for him, none of this would have happened. Meal blamed everything on Aaliyah. Fortunately, Jesse quickly subdued Meal. Hearing Meal's words, Aaliyah stood up in disbelief. That cup of tea was meant for him? So Meal intended to kill her. Aaliyah looked at Meal as if heartbroken. At this moment, the guards rushed in and took Meal away from Jesse. Aaliyah coldly watched the desperate Meal. Now, his good days were over. Meal in the cell, listening to the guards' comments about her, was stunned and unresponsive. The next day, the guards' inspection results came out. The poison in the kitchen and tea all indicated this was a premeditated murder case. Hearing the guards' words, the maids began to stir. The newspapers wrote down Meal's crimes. Everyone marveled at her wickedness. Aaliyah listened to the passers-by outside the window cursing Meal, mixed with praise for herself, feeling as if in a different world. Jesse, carrying tea, looked at the silent Aaliyah with great concern. Just thinking about his intention to support Aaliyah in communicating amicably with Meal, he felt very guilty. Seeing Jesse apologize dejectedly, Aaliyah gently told him that he had done nothing wrong. Even when faced with her past self who was so willful and unreasonable, Jesse still loyally advised her. Some people are born kind, but like Meal, there are many who repay kindness with enmity. Aaliyah was more grateful that this incident could enlighten Jesse. The world is treacherous. Don't trust others lightly in the future. Such a kind Jesse should not be hurt.